After shaking hands, Mikhail and Myron looked at each other for a long time, each of them having their own thoughts in two completely different directions. While Mikhail remembers his memories before he returned, Myron is still amazed by what is happening. After that, Myron couldn't stop laughing while leading Mikhail to the hall. Haha, I didn't expect the famous hero to know my name, what an honor. This was an act that seemed simple and normal for a knight of the royal family, but in the eyes of Mikhail, who had witnessed Myron fall into the abyss from which he could not get up, this smile was precious. Mikhail knew that Myron was originally going to look like this, no matter what rumors were about him later. A criminal, a hero of perishment. Although he is called by this nickname, Myron is actually a very optimistic, carefree and kind person. Mikhail also knows very well why Myron became a royal knight, although Kelebos is currently one of the four great families, but it is said that they are only secondary to the four great families. Marquis Kelebos wanted to change that assessment, so the first thing he did was to raise the honor of the family. Wouldn't it be an honor if his son became a royal knight and reached the pinnacle? For this reason, Myron became a royal knight. Thinking of that, Mikhail suddenly changed the subject of the conversation. Mr. Myron, how long have you been appointed as a royal knight? Myron replied honestly, well, not very long. But being a royal knight made me very proud, and even though I said that, there was a slight choking in his voice as if it wasn't his wish. Worried that he was a little ostentatious in front of the hero, Myron added with a bitter smile, of course, compared to the hero, that achievement was far inferior. Mikhail smiled and encouraged Myron. No, at his age, becoming a royal knight is something to be proud of, he has already achieved great things. Myron giggled like a child when he was complimented, and I felt much better when I heard him say that. Mikhail once again exclaimed in his heart, yes, it was this smile, it was still pure. For a moment, the empty laughter of the past flashed through his head like a comparison. Myron still kept this innocent smile because he didn't know the truth about his father yet, which was the reason why he self-destructed later. Ironically, people didn't want to punish Myron for killing his father, because Marquis Kelebos' crime was indisputable, so he wandered aimlessly like a madman. When Mikhail talked to Idan about how to deal a fatal blow to the Marquis of Kelebos, he said that he needed Myron for that. In any case, Myron would be against his father, his sense of justice would not forgive the Marquis of Kelebos. If he wanted to destroy the Marquis of Kelebos, it was best to let things go as they were in the past. That way, it was possible to destroy the Marquis Kelebos family without much effort. However, if that happened, it would inevitably have a tragic end for Marion. That was not what Mikhail wanted. Myron was not like the Marquis of Kelebos, he was a talented person with an upright personality like the model of a knight. It's completely different from his father who is full of cunning. So this time Mikhail wants to change the outcome of Myron. Mikhail suddenly changed the subject. What did he think of the Marquis, who was currently the leader of the Kelebos family? Myron tilted his head to look at Mikhail. You mean my father? Then, he replied without hesitation, he is a person who deserves respect. Our clan is one of the four great families of the Holy Kingdom. Wasn't he the one who had always tried to maintain that position? Mikhail just nodded through the speaker because, as expected, by this point, Marin's faith in his father was still very strong, which was why he was shocked to the point of madness later. After a moment of silence, Myron added, as if remembering that Mikhail was from the Walpurgis, of course, I know you don't have much sympathy for the Walpurgis, but that's just a bit of his youthful emotion, isn't it? My father was a mature man, and he wouldn't be so stupid as to bite and not let go of a single thing, and once again, Myron had an iron faith in his father, and it was also a sign that he didn't understand Marquis Kelebos at all. Hearing this, Mikhail had to try to restrain the moment when he almost laughed. Mature? Huh, ridiculous. Marquis Kelebos had not forgotten that feud. To be more precise, he had not yet escaped the feelings of youth, and Mikhail did not know exactly what the story of hatred was, only that Marquis Kelebos was a rival of Idan when he was young and was quite obsessed with Mikhail's mother, and later, when Mikhail's mother died, Marquis Kelebos had nurtured an endless resentment towards the Walpurgis family. In his previous life, when the Walpurgis family began to weaken, Marquis Kelebos put pressure on the Mikhail family, causing them to collapse faster. A lot of things happened during that time, but the culmination was when Marquis Kelebos exceeded the limit and Myron found out. Conflicts begin to arise and cannot be resolved. The terrifying reality of a respected clan has hurt Marin's self-esteem. Then it all ended in disaster. Remembering that time, Mikhail could only smile bitterly because the deeper Marin's faith was now, the more terrible the consequences were. Many thoughts came to Mikhail's mind, but it was not a good idea to deal with them right now, and it would not be good to tell the truth about Marquis Kelebos to Myron at the first meeting. Instead, Mikhail thought it might be more useful to throw something like a starting point. Come to think of it, Mr. Myron, something bad happened in the capital recently, you know. Myron pondered for a moment, but he didn't seem to be able to guess what Mikhail meant, so he hesitated to answer. If it was a bad thing, it must be. Mikhail saw this, so he bluntly revealed, the Dark Clan. Marin's face became stiff. Because of his upright personality, he naturally couldn't accept a dark family. But he hesitated for a moment before he spoke his thoughts. It was a rather sore problem, but it couldn't be solved overnight. Besides, Mikhail directly interrupted Marin's words with a question. Wasn't that a job that a royal knight should care about? Myron nodded at that question with a helpless expression. Yes, I understand what the hero meant, but my duty is to protect the king, to protect the palace. Someone else has already been sent to take care of it. Mikhail could see the regret in Marin's answer. Even if it was true that it was the duty of a royal knight to protect the emperor from all threats, nothing more, nothing less. After exploring Marin's thoughts, Mikhail immediately made a suggestion. I guess so. Wouldn't it be different if His Majesty, the main subject in the palace, allowed outside activities? Mikhail's words made Marin's eyes widen, which was a natural reaction, because Mikhail knew what he really wanted to do. Mikhail knew what Myron longed for was not the reputation of a royal knight confined to the confines of the royal palace. Although he was already a royal knight now, he really didn't like being tied up in a place like this. Myron became a royal knight entirely by the will of the Marquis of Kelebos, but in reality, acting as a royal knight did not suit his personality. That means that if there is a little more motivation to motivate him, it can definitely make him turn his steps outward, to approach the truth that he doesn't know yet. Mikhail was trying to do so. Before he returned, he couldn't change Marin's life because he had met him too late, but now it's different. This time, with Mikhail's urging, he hopes that Myron can learn the truth in time and not despair about it anymore. After that, Mikhail continued to make an offer to Myron. If you want, I can say a few words in front of the king. Of course, I don't intend to make an unreasonable request to His Majesty, as long as it's not an excessive request. Well, Myron hesitated for a moment because it was the first time they met. He didn't understand why Mikhail had suddenly made such an offer. Mikhail understood the anxiety in Marin's heart, so he took the initiative to explain it with spiritual factors. I don't just look at people with normal eyes, Mr. Myron. The god was always with me and sometimes whispered something. Now he said that he had his own mission. Mikhail's explanations sounded absurd but very convincing. At times like these, Mikhail really felt that nothing was as effective as selling semi-holy gods, that no one could completely escape the influence of the gods. Mikhail continued to hint with an attitude of idly waiting for Marin's decision. Well, of course, this could only be done with His Majesty's permission, but it was still possible, if he wanted to. Myron was still hesitant for a while. It wouldn't be easy to say that he wanted to participate in outside activities as a royal knight. However, things would be different if the person who mentioned this was a hero. Mikhail knew that for sure because in his previous life, Myron fully trusted the hero as Siegfried. Even in a state of insanity, he still respected Siegfried's words. After thinking for a while, Myron finally opened his mouth and said to Mikhail, "Can you help me?" Mikhail immediately smiled with satisfaction. "Okay, it's not difficult." Later, while exchanging a few small stories with each other, the two of them arrived in the hall without knowing it, and Myron stopped and solemnly said to Mikhail, "This is the hall, and it is my honor to be escorted by a hero." The door of the hall slowly opened with a heavy sound because of its massiveness. Mikhail walked inside slowly and carefully. A voice came from the side of the throne. "You have come a long way." Mikhail felt a rumbling in his stomach when he heard that greeting, but he did not show it. This voice could be considered friendly if you tried to think so. When Mikhail looked up, a middle-aged man sitting on the throne, he greeted like a classic script. "It was an honor to meet you, Your Majesty." Emperor Theseus, who was looking down at Mikhail with a look of boredom and his legs crossed, suddenly laughed lightly and got up from his seat. Theseus folded his hands behind his back, and began to walk around Mikhail with a keen probing gaze. "It seems that you don't really think so. You greet me respectfully because I am the emperor, you pretend to show your respect, but your tone is not respectful at all." Interestingly, Theseus' eyes lit up as he stared at the back of Mikhail's neck. In fact, it was true that Mikhail was cursing the damn old emperor in his head, but he still replied in the same voice as before, "It was an honor, Your Majesty." Theseus continued to walk around Mikhail as if he didn't like his reaction and continued, "I didn't expect a hero from Walpurgis." Mikhail laughed, and replied briefly, "I don't know, your majesty." At this time, Theseus kept laughing as if he had just heard a bad joke. "I think you know, since I was going to have a conversation with a hero, I also did a little research." Then the emperor took out the documents he had prepared in advance and began to read, Mikhail Walpurgis. "You were once a madman." Theseus's remarks were astonishingly straightforward, but Mikhail was not surprised at all. Theseus even casually added, "I used the word to praise you, am I being too rude to the hero?" Mikhail also showed a calm expression in response, "No, I had no intention of denying that fact." Hearing Mikhail say this, the emperor's amber eyes immediately looked at him. Depending on the situation, those eyes could be infinitely cold and also infinitely warm. At this time Mikhail felt that those eyes were cold, and this was a very rare expression. Most of the time, nothing could be seen in Theseus' eyes. But of course, this gaze doesn't bode well either. Theseus is reassessing Mikhail's existence, whether he's a mean person, a stupid person, obsessed with fame, or caught up in personal desires. Not only does Theseus want to evaluate Mikhail as a hero, but he also wants to see what kind of person Mikhail Walpurgis is. What he says now, and how he reacts will determine what kind of person he is in the eyes of the emperor. Unfortunately for Theseus, Mikhail was a genuine psychopath who had absolutely no intention of giving the answer the emperor wanted. Mikhail's answer was then accompanied by a crazy smile of great satisfaction, though, now that I was a psychopath who had evolved a little. The most powerful man on the continent, Theseus Riffle Alexandro, in general, people will think of him first when they hear those words. A king who ruled a great empire. So far, few people have been able to behave calmly in front of his authority. Even master mages or swordsmen have to bow their heads respectfully before him. That's not surprising, and it doesn't mean that he oppressed people excessively like a tyrant. Theseus was a king who understood better than anyone that rights without obligation would lead to disaster, so he set boundaries. From that line as a starting point, the emperor used it to assess what kind of person the other party was. Until now, Theseus has been able to see through and judge his opponents with great acumen, but this is the first time he has encountered an obstacle. Theseus couldn't help but wonder at the irregularity in Mikhail's answer, what kind of person this man was. The first time Theseus felt embarrassed by someone, because he couldn't judge what kind of person this Mikhail Walpurgis was, the failed first probe made him a little embarrassed. Even so, the emperor did not feel offended by this incident at all. If the hero chosen by the gods was an ordinary boy with a really recognizable target, the gods would be very disappointed. Seeing that Theseus was silent for a long time, Mikhail spoke up again in a humble voice. "I apologized if my tone was a little harsh, perhaps because I felt ashamed of my past." An ordinary king would feel offended when he heard that, although Mikhail was a hero, but he was still a Walpurgis under the emperor anyway. His words could be considered disrespectful to Theseus. However, he was more interested than angry, even half-jokingly. "If your father had known, he would have been very angry because of your attitude. I might have told Marquis Walpurgis about it." Mikhail still had a giggle on his face, but his majesty was different from his father. Wasn't he a little more generous? This was not just an act of insolence. It was obvious that Mikhail did this with the understanding that Theseus would be amused instead of angry. Although his eyes were cold, the emperor secretly smiled in his heart because he felt interesting. Theseus finally changed the subject to the main story. "Well, let's end this trivial story here, hero. So now, tell me. Was this world about to have a crisis that even my empire could not solve?" Theseus' expression immediately became serious and looked directly at Mikhail. Mikhail also stopped laughing and frankly said, "If we prepare now, it will be fine. There will definitely be a big disaster, but the scale of that disaster will depend on how we react to it." Theseus understands that if this is a story about the future that will change depending on how it is reacted to, then it means that no one can prevent disaster from happening, only find the best way to solve it. Theseus knew that it was time to listen to Mikhail's opinion. He remembered the ancient legends and sighed, "A calamity that our holy kingdom could hardly bear," and there was also a mention of an extraordinary great demon in history that was difficult to deal with. However, Mikhail tells Theseus a much more terrible truth than he imagined, that it is not just a great demon. Hiding in the darkness out there, the lord of those demons would also come, and when Mikhail spoke of this, the atmosphere in the hall immediately became heavy. Theseus muttered as he shook his head, "The demon lord, in other words, the god of evil." This was a name that didn't sound good at all. Theseus's empire had never faced a single demon until recently, before that he had only fought against the rebels or with people outside the empire, which were predictable enemies, but this time it was different. The devil was an unmet enemy waiting for the emperor. The future is unknown, the enemy is unknown. If there is a divine being behind these enemies, the consequences are really unpredictable. To say that it couldn't happen would be pointless, because not so long ago, Mikhail had already dealt with a great demon hiding right under the underground sewers of the capital, which was proof of his words. After much thought, Theseus asked Mikhail directly, "So what do you want from me? You didn't take those heavy steps here just to see my face, did you? You must have come because you had something to say to me." Theseus narrowed his eyes at Mikhail. He was indeed quite curious to know what kind of surprise this madman would give him. Mikhail pretended to think and looked into the emperor's eyes, Theseus patiently waiting for his answer because this answer seemed to reveal something about who he was. And after a while, Mikhail opened his mouth in a calm voice, "There is something that I want to say." Mikhail paused for a moment as if teasing the emperor's patience, and then he suddenly laughed, "Haha. I don't want anything," he replied with a bright and sincere smile as if the purpose of coming here in the first place was not to ask for anything. As soon as he heard the answer, the emperor's eyes twitched. "Don't you want anything?" Seeing that Theseus had such a rare clear reaction, Mikhail smiled with satisfaction in his heart and recalled his conversation with Archbishop Ali shortly after arriving in the capital. When Mikhail asked about the emperor's weakness, Archbishop Ali thought for a long time and then said, "A weakness, I'm not sure if this will help you, but..." Archbishop Ali's subsequent words with a bitter smile recalled, His Majesty was a very carefree person. But every time he talks about abdicating the throne, he becomes impatient. Mikhail immediately understands when he hears it. To put it simply, the carefree personality of the current monarch only becomes irritable when it comes to abdicating. When the previous emperor asked Theseus if there was anything he wanted, of course the main question was related to the emperor's status. Theseus replied, "I don't want anything." According to Archbishop Ali's understanding of Theseus as a child, that is his honest answer. But that answer made Theseus' mother unhappy. It is said that for 2 days from that day Theseus had to hear all kinds of bitter words from his mother, who was also the previous queen, which was a terrible humiliation that Theseus had to receive in exchange for a reward. Theseus's temperament did not change at all even after being scolded by his mother. The current emperor was such a person, although his childhood personality had improved significantly, but his mischievous and carefree nature was still there, and so was the memory of that time. After hearing Mikhail's answer, Theseus stood still for a moment as if he was recalling an old memory. Because he was carefree, he also liked carefree people. The answer was actually very simple. However, giving such a simple answer in front of the emperor was not an easy task, even if it was a hero. Theseus reflected on his former self and smiled incredulously. "Don't you want anything? You said you didn't want anything. I'm sure you want something, want to be the center of this continent, or want me to promise to help you with all your might," in Theseus' voice full of sarcasm. But Mikhail still firmly affirmed, "I was not chosen as a hero for no reason. Your Majesty, support is something that you can achieve on your own, and you must be worthy of being a hero." Theseus' expression was as if he had just been slapped, but he continued to ask without getting angry, "So you don't need it?" Mikhail continued to speak without hesitation, "This empire is ruled by you, King Alexander. Without a doubt, I wouldn't be the center of this place," Mikhail said, because in the words of Archbishop Ali, the emperor was mischievous and stubborn, but at the same time, he was also a responsible king. However, if he just refused the opportunity to receive benefits from the emperor, it was not a good idea, so Mikhail skillfully kicked the ball to him. His Majesty would not give the gods something more suitable for him. The corner of Theseus' mouth immediately smirked. It made a rather terrifying impression with fierce eyes. "In other words, you didn't directly ask for anything, but you wanted me to think of something to give you." As if anticipating that reaction, Mikhail looked at Theseus with a relaxed expression, because he did not come here as Walpurgis, but as a hero, which was actually not as hard to hear as His Majesty had just said, but it would be true if His Majesty looked at it that way. "I would be very grateful if your Majesty considered it to be my trust in you. I wish I could become a perfect hero, but unfortunately, I still have many shortcomings." Theseus finally smiled with a pleasant expression. "You really don't look like a hero at all, at least different from the hero I imagined." After that, the emperor smiled with satisfaction and continued to say as he walked around, "Okay, then I will do as I please. To be honest, I have no intention of changing my mind." Mikhail also obediently said yes through the speaker. He knew from the beginning how a self-respecting emperor could change his plans just because of a few words from others, so he just needed a little more peace of mind to say it freely. After that, Theseus began to say his plan: we will organize an army of knights to fight the demons, a formal announcement will be sent to each lord, and we will not overdo the matter, but we will raise our vigilance against the demons. After speaking, Theseus suddenly threw something to Mikhail, who quickly grabbed it reflexively. It was Theseus's lapel pin, on which was engraved the royal emblem and the emperor's own signature. He said with a bright smile, as a reward, let me know if you need assistance. Don't say that you have received enough support from the church, I can afford to help you more than the church, this is my mark. Whenever you are in the territory of the Holy Kingdom, everyone will help you with all their might, you can use it however you want, Theseus said as he waved his hand freely. Mikhail had no reason to refuse, the emperor's symbol meant a lot, it would be of great help to his heroic deeds in the future, so he didn't need to hesitate to take it right away. Hehe, you gave it to me too much. Theseus seemed quite satisfied with this conversation, and before it was over, he asked Mikhail again, do you have anything else to say? Mikhail took advantage of the emperor's good mood to say something special, but Sir Myron seemed to be quite interested in what was going on in the capital. Theseus thought for a moment and then said in a relaxed voice, if it was Myron, then it must be the Kelebos family, the talent is not bad. Seeing that Theseus seemed to have a good impression of Myron, Mikhail immediately made a suggestion, yes, I was just speaking my mind, but nothing would affect if a royal knight was absent for a while, right, your majesty. Perhaps Theseus knew a little bit about Walpurgis and Kelebos' past, so he felt that Mikhail's proposal must have some implications, and he readily agreed, since the royal knights had not known anything about what was going on out there lately, there should be at least one person out there to experience it. Then tell that Kelebos kid to go out and have an experience, anyway, it's a waste to go out, bring me a result that will make me happy. Mikhail was excited in his heart when he heard this, the emperor was indeed quite generous to those whom he found interesting. After turning his back to the throne, Theseus sent Mikhail out with his arms out, you can go, I'm sure you're satisfied with this result. Mikhail obediently bowed his head, yes, that's right. Finishing his words, Mikhail turned his heel and walked towards the door of the hall in a victorious position. But before he could walk out of the hall, Mikhail suddenly stopped and called out to the emperor, and also, your majesty. I hope that next time I can talk to the person hiding behind that pillar again, Mikhail said with a grin and turned his head to look at the emperor's throne. However, the point where his gaze was directed was the pillar behind the left of the throne. Theseus couldn't help but let out a loud cry in surprise and looked at Mikhail for a moment with his eyes wide open with interest. Then, he smiled and nodded as if he had just eaten a dessert that was just as interesting as the appetizer and main course. Okay, you can. After Mikhail left the hall, Theseus sat silently for a while on the throne without changing his face. A moment later, he stepped down from the throne again and walked to the middle of the hall, his eyes still focused on the door of the hall full of thought. It took a while for Theseus to stop looking at the door, look up and close his eyes with a sigh, and was caught by him. At this time, an old man appeared from behind the pillar where Mikhail had been staring intently before leaving. He wore the armor of a royal knight, on which there were 4 chains, that is, 4 chains, a symbol that only members of the royal family could receive. It was Hector Liam, the commander of the royal knights. Theseus smiled at Hector as soon as he saw him. It seemed that the hero had already noticed you. Hector looked at the place where Mikhail had stood before with sunken eyes. There was no way he could detect God just because he was a magician. Theseus chuckled, he was a funny guy. It was interesting that things didn't go my way. What's the value of living a dull life? In response to Theseus' words, Hector also laughed with amusement. Yes, that's right, I heard that he has always been, but heroes are heroes anyway. Hearing those words, Theseus went to the chessboard and picked up the chess piece that represented the hero. The hero was a hero after all, and he believed the hero's words, no matter how unusual Mikhail acted. It also meant that there were countless things that Theseus and the Holy Kingdom needed to do in the future, and if an inevitable disaster were to occur, he had to be mentally prepared to confront it. Theseus closed his eyes and muttered after putting down the chess, so that this empire could maintain the momentum of growth as it always did. Wasn't the hero born to do it? As soon as Mikhail walked out of the hall, Myron hurriedly walked towards him. Hero, here you are. Seeing Myron's impatient look, Mikhail smiled brightly and said, very good. The king immediately agreed. Hearing this, Myron's expression instantly brightened. It was obvious that the duties of a royal knight were not suitable for him, but he was forced to follow his father's will, so now he was so happy. Mikhail didn't hesitate to ask, looking at his reaction, it seems that the position of the royal knight is a bit heavy for you. Myron laughed bitterly and slumped his shoulders. Ahaha, I showed it so clearly. After a sigh, Myron confessed to Mikhail, I would love to be a knight. But it may be said that this was not what I had imagined, far from what I had expected, and it was an honor for me to carry out the task of protecting the king's safety, but, speaking of which, Myron choked as if he did not know how to express his thoughts. But Mikhail understood what he meant. The task of a royal knight was very simple, to protect the emperor and the royal palace, to punish any bad guys who had the intention of touching the heart of the empire. When the royal knights went to battle, they existed, but not for the people of the Holy Kingdom, but only for the emperor. Mikhail continued what Myron wanted to say. Didn't that mean he wanted to save more people? After that, Myron's gaze slackened slightly. Hero, have I been removed from the royal knights? Mikhail shook his head. No, he is still allowed to retain his title. It seems that His Majesty wants to make an exception. It is a miracle. Those words have completely dispelled the worry on Myron's face. If I can be outside acting like a royal knight, that's what I really want. Thank you, hero. It's really a great favor. Mikhail immediately seized the opportunity to mention repaying the favor. Well, of course, I don't work for nothing. I also have something I want you to do for me. Mikhail tilted his head and asked, what was the matter? Mikhail went straight to the point. Rat. Myron frowned and thought for a moment and then asked again, isn't the rat the one who has a relationship with the great devil that the hero has purified? Mikhail nodded as if satisfied with Myron's quickness. Yes, but since the great devil appeared, I had to hurry to purify it, so I couldn't grasp the whole story related to that rat. Myron exclaimed excitedly, ah, so you're telling me to find out the whole story about that mouse? Mikhail grinned and replied, yes. Actually, Mikhail already knew everything there was to know about rats. Even if he didn't find it difficult to find out on his own, but having to let Myron figure out the whole story, this was a step to bring him closer to the truth. Myron didn't have the slightest doubt about Mikhail's intentions and excitedly accepted, yes, I'll do this for you. As Myron was about to leave, Mikhail called him back, and added one more thing. After learning the whole story, don't do anything more and come to me now. Mikhail's eyes now seemed to be commanding Myron to remember not to act shockingly, even if the truth he witnessed was extremely painful and shocking. Myron was a little surprised by Mikhail's request. He meant that I couldn't take any further action and should go back and report to him immediately, right? However, since it was a request from the hero he admired, he quickly agreed without much thought. Yes, I will do as he says. After that, Mikhail also left the royal palace. Obviously he had anticipated what would happen next, but he didn't say it. After all, it was a matter that Myron himself had to witness, and judged. Mikhail was just trying to prevent the worst. Set asked Mikhail curiously as he was walking down the street, is there something behind that mouse? I think there must be some reason for him to entrust the investigation to that child. Mikhail clicked his tongue and replied, yes. Rats are very greedy. He fills his stomach by any means. He never hesitates to go over the limit and do all sorts of dirty things, from child trafficking to illegal slave distribution to assassination contracts. That's what Set knows, but it seemed that Mikhail was aiming for something else. He didn't intend to tell her right now but just smiled. She would find out soon, very soon. As soon as he returned to the family mansion in the capital, Mikhail saw a very strange scene that made him stand in shape. In front of Idan, the master assassin Hidos and his daughter who were kneeling with confused expressions that showed that their life had been wasted. Mikhail couldn't help but ask Idan, what was his father doing? Idan cursed Mikhail in front of Hidos and Mia, that rotten brat, you were the one who told them to come to see me, and now what the hell are you asking? Old Mikhail replied, because I believe that you will do everything well, firmly believe in me. Idan immediately raised the stick as big as a human head and looked at Mikhail with eyes that wanted to hit him. Just by looking at it, you know that they are already in trouble. Why did you bring them to me? Hidos was startled and quietly raised his hand. I am a master assassin. Idan interrupted Hidos in a cold voice, shut up. Mikhail had to open his mouth to explain. Talia is one of the dark guilds. I'm going to put them in a sunny place in our clan's territory. I'm sure I'm a person who can do everything, so I'm entrusting them to you. Idan sneered, sounds too reasonable. In short, you're telling you're going to push them to me because you're a busy hero doing this and that. Mikhail reasoned casually, if you succeed as a hero, that will also help my family. Hearing this, Idan's anger seemed to subside a little. Well, that's right, and then he looked down at the two kneeling people with confused eyes, their arms crossed. Idan began to think about how to use them, a black spirit and a master assassin. Well, I think I understand. For a moment, Mia and Hidos glanced at each other in confusion, because Idan just stared at the two of them without saying anything. After a while, Adon shrugged his shoulders and flicked his fingers. After all, my family is not behaving so shallowly that you have to worry so much. Immediately the magic that binds both of you is released at the same time. Mia and Hitos both smiled brightly and breathed a sigh of relief. Ah, I thought I was going to die. While they moved their bodies that had just been freed, Adon continued to say, Talia will be transformed into an intelligence agency affiliated with our clan. After all, I am lacking information, so it's not bad if there are talented people. I'll send you the detailed plan later. Hitos immediately bowed his head in emotion at Adon's statement, feeling, thank you, if they are on Valpurgis personnel list, they don't need to hide in the dark at all. Adon nodded slightly and waved his hand. Hitos and Mia understood the meaning and disappeared on the spot. After Mia and Hitos left, Adon turned to talk to Mikhail again. I have a lot to say, but let's start with the most important thing. How was the meeting with the king? Just looking at Adon's bright smile, it seemed that he was looking forward to his son getting into trouble. This happened not only in a day or two, so Mikhail also ignored it and summarized what was going on in the palace. There was no big deal. He asked me some pretty tough questions, but those questions I had anticipated. What I didn't expect was, I received this unexpected gift, and after saying that, Mikhail took out the lapel pin he had received from the emperor. Adon looked at the lapel pin in surprise and even admired it a little. It was a symbol, a pin engraved with the symbol of His Majesty's authority. This is not a simple pin. Mikhail nodded in agreement. This thing will definitely help you a lot for the hero's work. Adon once again exclaimed in an admiring voice. It was certain, no nobleman in the empire had the courage to ignore His Majesty's wishes. And Adon also realized, it seems that the emperor had made this decision on impulse, but the lapel pin had already been made with the intention of giving it to Mikhail beforehand, and it was even engraved with a special magic mark so that no one but Mikhail could use it. When he leaves his hand from it, the magic is automatically activated and the signature symbolizing the emperor also disappears. Then Mikhail got up in a hurry and stuffed the lapel pin into his pocket with a little satisfaction. Now I have to go, I have a lot of things to worry about. Adon was silent as if he was thinking for a moment and then said in a heavy voice, so, I mean the Kelebos family. Mikhail replied hesitantly, yes, that's right. After that, Adon was silent again. Mikhail didn't know what his father was thinking, but deep down in his eyes there seemed to be a lot of trouble. Before Mikhail walked out, Adon opened his mouth again. Son, do you know why the Kelebos family hates our family so much? Mikhail didn't think much and said bluntly, at least I know that he fought with me for my mother. Isn't that enough? Adon nodded with an unpleasant expression. Yes, that's right, it's just a trivial story that I don't need to know any more, but actually, before you were born, even after Cecil and I got married, he didn't give up and didn't stop flirting with your mother. Mikhail heard this and cursed with blood. This bastard. Adon laughed bitterly. Yes, that bastard. After all, father and son are indeed compatible in cursing the enemy. After the curse sounded as smooth as sun silk, Adon reminisced about the past, and there were times when I was quite close to him. Mikhail comforted his father. It was surprising that relationships broke down because of a woman, but it didn't really matter if they were close or not. Adon nodded heavily. Well, but in fact, my indecision was also the cause of that half-hearted relationship. Mikhail knows Adon's weakness. Basically, he is a great mage and a capable head of the family, but he has a problem of being often soft-hearted, just like how he treats Viscount Nostra. The only difference is that his relationship with Nostra is a family relationship. In order to diffuse the tense atmosphere, Mikhail let go of a whine mixed with sarcasm. How wonderful it would be if you treated others as hard as you did. Adon just shrugged his shoulders but his facial muscles relaxed a little. There was nothing worth talking about that. Then he laughed bitterly. Anyway, I just want you to know about it. Kelebos will hold a grudge against us until the last minute, so don't act like me. Mikhail nodded affirmatively. You know. By the way, referring to this topic, Mikhail also asked, what about the fact that you proposed to me? Adon raised his eyebrows a little surprised, but quickly remembered. Yes, I did. But I don't know what to expect from Kelebos' second son. Adon asked with obvious curiosity, wanting Mikhail to give a hint of what he was going to do. But Mikhail ignored that curiosity and said, okay. Adon immediately frowned and looked at Mikhail with a suspicious expression. I don't know what my son is trying to do. What the hell are you going to do? Mikhail smirked at the corner of his mouth full of intrigue. After all, when it came to the most prestigious family, it would not be easy to be swayed by the slight scratches on the outside. If there was something big enough to destroy the marquis, there was ultimately only one answer. It had to explode from within, and the conversation between father and son Mikhail ended in limbos there without any clear explanation. Although Mikhail's half-hearted answer does not clearly state the purpose of approaching Myron, Idan is also smart enough to understand that the explosive could only be Myron Kelebos, although it is unclear how Mikhail will lead it to happen. Idan never imagined how much the Kelebos' son, whom the Kelebos had so much expected to glorify the family, would choose to turn his back on his family in such an extreme way if it weren't for Mikhail's intervention. That night, with a roar, the entire building in the corner of the underworld began to collapse, but the justice enforcer didn't stop. He just slashed and stabbed randomly. After all, it was pointless to take pity on these bastards. After Rat fell off his horse, most of his manpower was taken over by Taria, but not all. Among them, there were some who took over the work that Rat was doing. Jack, the leader of Hyena, a guild that ruled the Dark West, was one such person. After Jack was knocked into a corner, he began to let go of the curse. Damn, why would a royal knight come to a place like this? Of course, there were many sins that Jack had committed, but to the point of having a royal knight intervene was another matter, because the royal knight was supposed to only come to those who challenged the supreme power of the empire, which made him suspect that Myron was not a royal knight. But those ruthless hands, cold eyes, and powerful arms, when wearing the emblematic costume of a royal knight, there was no reason why a person of such caliber would pretend to be a royal knight for nothing. Myron walked in front of Jack with the blade dripping with blood. Jack, the president of the Hyena Dark Society, is it you? Jack immediately made an excuse even before the crime was exposed. I had never challenged the authority of the royal family. How could someone like me tarnish the authority of His Majesty the Great Emperor? Myron immediately interrupted with a voice that did not have the slightest warmth, and shut up. On the way here, Myron witnessed countless scenes that made him feel nauseous, and suddenly, his heart boiled completely from that moment. Myron just wants to destroy everything around him instantly and kill anyone involved in what is happening in this underworld. What Myron had witnessed was that children of about 10 years old were locked in cages, a lot of poor children huddled behind prison bars. They didn't have any of the vitality that children of that age should have, and when Myron looked into their eyes, it was lifeless like a zombie. Thinking back to that horrible scene, Myron squeezed Jack's collar tightly and pulled him up. With a surge of rage in his heart, he asked him in a low voice, "Are you the one who took over the damn work of the rats?" Jack still stubbornly proved his innocence because he couldn't touch the Emperor's high-level person anyway. Who cares about it? Myron didn't listen to his fallacy anymore and slammed his head on the floor. He shouted in a hoarse voice full of resentment as if he was about to vomit blood, "Shut up, this is the trafficking of innocent children. You are no different from worms eating the empire. The worst thing is that no one in this underworld really thinks it's bad, that's obvious, but Myron has only understood until now. Even if these people pretend to repent of their sins here, they are not sincere. Once Myron is gone, they will continue their business with someone else on the throne." Myron thinks that there is only one way to completely cut off their line, and he immediately interrogates Jack. "Who is behind you?" Jack is so scared that 2 eggs are bingo, stammering and shaking his head. "What do you mean?" Myron didn't want to hear any more superfluous words, so he directly broke Jack's right arm to give him a warning. The sound of terrifying screams echoed everywhere, but Maron's hands continued to tighten without letting go. His anger could not be easily subdued with this alone. But the smashed right arm was enough of a deterrent, so Myron reluctantly stopped and interrogated me in a low voice that was in stark contrast to the murderous gaze, telling me. Jack gasped in panic and hurriedly explained, "I don't know, I really don't know anything. How can I know who he is when that bastard is hiding his identity from me?" Myron gritted his teeth as he slammed Jack against the wall until he was dead and then let go. His testimony made him think. He didn't know his identity, but there was once a clear entity, so there was really someone behind this case. Moreover, the caliber of the person behind this case was not small, but no matter how big it was, Myron was determined to destroy it before the scale of child trafficking became even larger. After handing over the rest of the hyena to the guards, Myron immediately went deeper into their lair in search of the next clue, believing that if each clue was analyzed and examined carefully, the truth would be found. Myron told himself that he needed to get rid of the germs that were destroying this empire as soon as possible. Of course, he also wished to receive the full support of his family in this mission, but then, something very astonishing appeared in front of him. A handkerchief was lying on the table in a forgotten corner, on which was embroidered a black rose. The answer to why Myron paid attention to it was simple: it was the symbol of the Kelebos clan. Myron was stunned for a moment and doubts began to arise. It shouldn't be in a place like this, but why is there this thing here? Grasping the handkerchief, Myron tried to convince himself that this was just a silly joke, his initial conclusion that Jack the Cutter must have tried this not funny thing at all to make fun of his innocent family. In his heart, he tried to deny that there was no way his family had anything to do with these people, but the harsh truth was gradually coming out in front of his eyes. Jack didn't even know about Marin's appearance. How could he arrange this scarf? With such a thought, Myron shook his head firmly. It couldn't be like that, there was no way. He finally let go of the proof towel and came to the conclusion that the Kelebos family was not involved. But even if he tried to convince himself to think so, his righteous heart still wouldn't allow him to completely extinguish the fire of suspicion that had just ignited. Marin's attempt to trust the clan was quickly smashed by his father's call that night, and he stammered to question his father without understanding what he was thinking. His father, who was saying. Marquis Kelebos said coldly over the phone, "I mean, you don't do such useless things anymore, son. I only want you to bring glory to our family, to fulfill the duties of a royal knight as I told you when you went to the capital." And although Marquis Kelebos repeated his words so clearly, there seemed to be only buzzing in Marin's ears. He once again reaffirmed to Marquis Kelebos the significance of this mission in order to convince him, "But father, this is the task that the king has given you. Moreover, what you are doing now is to improve the reputation of the family." However, Marin's response was still the Marquis of Kelebos' resolute discouragement. "No, stop." It was the most resolute objection he had ever heard from his father. Marquis Kelebos did not even give his son a chance to refute, but directly ordered, "I will soon arrive in the capital. Until then, do no more useless things, fulfill the duty of a royal knight, which is the order of the head of the house." Myron exclaimed in surprise, but there was no sound on the other end of the line, and Marquis Kelebos hung up the phone before his son could say any more words. Myron hung up sadly. He didn't understand what the problem was in his heart. Didn't his father always tell him to live in glory? Why, then, at that moment, speculations that should never have been made came to his mind. The image of a handkerchief embroidered with black roses appeared again, a huge behind-the-scenes background that could make a big deal in the capital, and the person behind the illegal work in the underworld must be at a high level. Myron quickly understood but also quickly denied his speculation again. No way, he knew it was a thought that he shouldn't have. If he didn't trust his family, who would trust his family anymore? So Myron came to the conclusion that it couldn't be like that, and decided to give up speculation about his father. Meanwhile, Master Assassin Hidos was still watching Myron from afar, quietly hiding in the trees and silently memorizing the details, so the seeds of doubt had been sown. After that, it had been about a week since Mikhail arrived in the capital. Contrary to the initial prediction, the time he had stayed in the capital was a little longer, but it wasn't bad either. Mikhail was in the central temple instead of the Walpurgis mansion. After many days, the butler Mordin contacted Mikhail and showed him the view behind him through the fruit magic bridge. "Everything is fine here, lack of master." Mikhail nodded with satisfaction and looked at the sprouts of the embankment world that were growing well. Those trees were already much bigger. The butler Mordin replied happily, "Yes, the vitality of that tree was very strong." Mikhail continued to tell the butler Mordin, "They would grow even more, if you left them alone. They would purify the poisons around the land on their own, no need to watch." When the butler Mordin nodded his head to show that he understood, Mikhail suddenly changed the subject. "By the way, do you regularly do some muscle training exercises that I said no?" "Butler, you will live a long time no matter what you do, but to reach a high level, taking care of health is essential." Butler Mordin heard about training, but his eyebrows were black, lacking master. "I realized a fact while I was seriously practicing." Looking at the serious look on the butler Mordin's face, Mikhail replied in an excited voice, "Oh, what is it? Tell me, butler." However, in response to Mikhail's expectation was a lament of the lazy. "Muscle strength is not something that can be developed overnight, especially for an old man like me." Mikhail looked at the butler Mordin indifferently. A late afternoon mage should not lament just because he had gone through a period of time like this. The butler Mordin said bitterly, "No matter what the afternoon or whatever, the mage is also a human. I will take care of it myself, so don't worry. When I was in my prime, I was among the magicians." Mikhail also knew that the young butler Mordin must have been so qualified that even Edon couldn't achieve it sloppily, but hearing him beggar in the past made him turn around uncomfortably. "Well, whatever," the miserable butler Mordin shouted, "are you ignoring me?" Mikhail directly ignored his question and changed the subject. "How is Leon?" The butler Mordin also quickly caught up with Mikhail. "The young master Leon is growing at an incredible rate. At this rate, I guess he can really reach the master level within a year." Mikhail also thought that might be the case, because before the regression, except for Siegfried, the genius who reached the level of mastery of swordsmanship the fastest was Leon. Now that all conditions are ready, he can definitely become a master within a year. He must be competing with his own future right now. Of course not all masters are the same. Just because they are called masters does not mean that they are all the same masters. In fact, there is still a slight difference in the level of masters, and Leon in his previous life was the pinnacle of the masters. After that, Mikhail told the butler Mordin again, if he needs anything, you can support him wholeheartedly. He is a person worth investing in. The butler Mordin nodded obediently. Yes, I understand. The conversation with the butler ended there and Mikhail quickly turned off the magic communication tool away. Then he stretched his shoulders to his feet, turned to look outside, and watched the sun slowly sink through the window. The sunset led to a lot of reflection in Mikhail's mind. He muttered to himself, I need to be ready, he must be here now. Yesterday Idan had returned to Walpurgis territory. In other words, Mikhail was the only Walpurgis still in the capital, so now Mikhail would have to take care of the rest of the matter himself. Bored of being in the room, Mikhail went out for a walk while waiting for news of the person he had just mentioned. Not long after, Hidos suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The hero, the Marquis, had just arrived in the capital. Mikhail smiled mischievously and turned to look at Hidos. As expected from the assassin master and also the master of stealth, the news was updated really quickly and timely. Meanwhile, Marquis Kelebos had arrived in the capital and went straight to where he needed to be. The place where Marquis Kelebos was going had been decided from the day he called Myron, and by his standards, what his son was doing now was definitely beyond his limits, and he needed to draw the line again. Hidos finished his report and asked Mikhail, what should we do now? Mikhail laughed sly at Hidos' question. What do you mean, don't do anything, leave it alone? Hidos raised his head in surprise and looked at Mikhail as if he didn't understand why he didn't do anything when the enemy had arrived in front of him. Mikhail still explained in his usual open way, we don't need to interrupt the happy conversation between the two of us. Hidos nodded aloud. Myron needed a reason to understand why he couldn't investigate the capital's underworld and why he couldn't dig deep into the person behind it. At this moment, Myron still didn't really doubt. The suspicion was very small. Now Mikhail would have to wait to see if that little suspicion would go away, or if it would develop into a deep suspicion. Hidos was also curious about the outcome and asked Mikhail, the hero, if the second son of the Kelebos family would do something against the family. Mikhail recalled the handkerchief he had asked Idan to set up in Jack's lair. Another half-hearted answer was given, well, perhaps, if he was sure. Hidos immediately understood that the conversation between the father and son of the Marquis of Kelebos would be the catalyst for that. Of course, the reason Mikhail could be sure was simply because he had witnessed this in his previous life. He knew the thoughts of both the father and son of the Marquis of Kelebos, and then Mikhail just instructed Hidos without explaining anything further, follow carefully, some interesting things are about to happen. Myron was seriously unwelcoming when he saw his father who had just arrived in the capital. Father, why did he suddenly come here? Myron wanted to ask if I did it because I didn't believe in you. Marquis Kelebos cleverly dodged it. I just wanted to make sure that you really heard what I said. Of course, that wasn't the main reason I came here. The purpose of visiting the capital of the Marquis of Kelebos, it didn't take much time for Myron to think about it. He could only think of one reason, and that was the hero. Although Mikhail only went quietly to the capital, Myron knew for sure that there was no way the news would not reach the ears of the Marquis of Kelebos. After 10 minutes had passed and the two of them were still tense and didn't say anything to each other, Marquis Kelebos decided to open his mouth first. I was dissatisfied when you stopped me from continuing the investigation. Myron honestly expressed his grievances. It would bring more glory to our family, but why would you, Marquis Kelebos, directly pour cold water on Marin's righteous aspirations? That's not what I want. Marquis Kelebos glanced at the royal knight's uniform hanging from the hook and flatly denied Marin's opinion. If I want you to make a difference, I won't recommend you to be a royal knight. I will not try to elevate you to the status of a holy knight. I want you to achieve glory through your majesty. And Marquis Kelebos pulled the seat opposite Myron in the posture of a powerful householder. However, this time Myron did not back down from his father's imposition and tried to refute it, which was not the only way that could bring glory. Marquis Kelebos replied in a firmer voice, do you think the glory that comes from this title belongs only to you? Your glory also represents our entire family. Hearing those words, Myron bowed his head in contemplation for a moment. After a moment, Myron said in a sarcastic voice, isn't this family already very prestigious, father? Hearing those implicit words, it was Marquis Kelebau's turn to be silent for a while. His gaze at his son narrowed slightly. What should I do? In the eyes of the Marquis of Kelebos, his son should only quietly devote himself to being a royal knight like a puppet, not to care so much about external matters, but the Marquis of Kelebos could not declare it publicly. Later, he chose to advise Myron. In order to maintain the power of a noble family, he needed the help of the royal family, but Myron was still very firm in his goal and refuted, but the king himself had entrusted him with this task. Marquis Kelebos replied firmly, he was only assigning a task, but he didn't even say that it was directly related to any honorary reward. Myron was extremely dissatisfied when he heard this, but for the moment he couldn't find anything to refute. Marquis Kelebos himself knew that what he was talking about now was only a ridiculous fallacy and deception, but it didn't matter, whether it was a fallacy or whatever, because his son was a naive, even foolish man to mistakenly believe that this family was built only on honor and glory. Marquis Kelebos thought that reasoning was enough for this, and Myron would not be able to disobey him anymore. However, contrary to the expectations of the Marquis of Kelebos, Myron expressed his desire fiercely. He did not consider glory to be such a reward, nor did he need to demand an honorary reward for the family. I have been given permission by your majesty, so I believe that it is also an honor to help others and pursue justice as a royal knight. This is my path. Marquis Kelebos couldn't help but be stunned and gritted his teeth in anger when he heard this. Unable to control his son easily, he exploded in anger and slammed the table to his feet. Regardless of whether Myron's words were reasonable or absurd, Marquis Kelebos decided to use his shouts to show his voice. Myron, he wanted to remind his son who was the head of the family. After that, he gave a stern order. I have already said, don't dig into the underworld of the capital anymore. It is an order from the head of the clan. It was a deliberate act. Myron would usually be timid when the Marquis of Kelebos was so strong, and he would accept his father's every order, but this time was different. Myron stood there, looked Marquis Kelebos in the eye and asked, why? The unusual reaction made him stunned for a moment. The son, who had always bowed his head to listen to his father's words, was now looking directly at him with sharp eyes and unflinching. Marquis Kelebos involuntarily broke out in a cold sweat as he was scrutinized by Myron's gaze. He couldn't even think of a way to stop his son anymore. Damn, there was no good reason to stop him right now. In all respects, Myron was reasonable. He was also allowed by the emperor. Even if Marquis Kelebos saw things through the eyes of a third person, there was nothing wrong with Myron's actions, and he still held the prestigious royal knighthood that the Kelebos family wanted. Seeing that Marquis Kelebos could not say a word, doubts began to rise in Myron's heart, because of my orders that he did not continue to investigate the Dark Guild any further. Instead, I took the time to reflect, to think about why I stopped you from investigating that Dark Guild, whether there was some weakness in this clan in the underworld. As Myron remembered how the past week had been tormented by skepticism, the bitter feeling still lingered in his mind. The image of the handkerchief with the symbol of the Kelebos family is still clearly visible even if Myron does not take it away. Afterwards, Myron honestly revealed to me the reason why he became suspicious. While investigating that guild, he discovered a handkerchief with the symbol of our clan. Marquis Kelebos was stunned and blurted out, "What?" At that moment, Myron's gaze swept over him. He was so innocent that he was stupid, but he was not an inanimate person, even if it was only for a moment. But Myron instinctively understood the meaning of his father's reaction. His fists involuntarily tightened, and gradually, the doubts he was trying to suppress were emerging. Marquis Kelebos quickly adjusted his expression, frowned, and played the victim's shoulder. "It must be their trick. Maybe you have been trapped. They must have thought that I would win, and even if I hadn't been deceived, would have started." And the more Marquis Kelebos's words spoken, the more it made Myron feel ringing in his ears, as if his mind was automatically preventing those lies from entering. Myron suddenly interrupted Marquis Kelebos' reasoning. "If that's the case, fine." A little dissatisfaction was evident on his expression for a moment, but it quickly disappeared. "What do you mean?" Myron continued to say with a firm attitude that I knew my shortcomings, which was why I asked for help from someone I trusted. Marquis Kelebos frowned. "Help?" Myron nodded and said directly, "I asked the hero." After being stopped by Marquis Kelebos a few days ago, Myron asked Mikhail to investigate the underworld on his behalf. Marquis Kelebos opened his mouth in astonishment. "If you are a hero, you mean Mikhail Walpurgis. Why would you extend your hand to Walpurgis?" Knowing that he would react that way when he heard the name Walpurgis, after a while, Myron shook his head, knowing that our family did not get along with the Walpurgis. "So I asked the hero." not someone in the Walpurgis family, to carry out this task, Myron declared, as if it were two different people, which made the Marquis of Kelebos even more stunned. In fact, in Marin's eyes there was a difference. Even if he did not trust Walpurgis, he can still trust the hero. Marquis Kelebos felt extremely uncomfortable, and at the same time impatient. He felt that Mikhail seemed to know something and was plotting to take advantage of Myron for his own purposes. Moreover, Mikhail is investigating the underworld is a more serious matter than Marin's problem. It is clear that this is a problem that needs to be solved urgently, although he does not know what else Mikhail is plotting, but he cannot let Walpurgis find clues about his clan. Thoughtfully, Marquis Kelebos couldn't look into his son's eyes. On the contrary, Marin's gaze was towards his father, so quiet that he didn't notice. Marquis Kelebos' expression remained unchanged, there was no sign of panic. But even though he tried to hide it, he couldn't hide his gaze. For a moment, his eyes wavered, very fleetingly, but that was enough for Myron to conclude. Sighing a little because of it, Myron muttered in a voice so low that only he could hear it, "I really did." Looking at his father with deep doubts, Marin's clear eyes instantly darkened, and the truth was almost exposed. Not long after, a faint shadow appeared in Mikhail's room, which was Hido's. After hearing Hido's recount the whole thing, Mikhail laughed. "Well, I understand." Then, a sinister smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Even if he was a marquis, he couldn't completely control his son. As if it was funny, Mikhail continued to laugh with a twisted expression like a villain. As planned, it was time to dig into the hole between father and son. That night, it was a dark and cloudy night, and the sky had begun to gloom as soon as the sun went out. In a hidden corner of the underworld, death quietly followed the trail of swords slashing down from all directions with a heavy sound. Scattered here and there, those in the underworld related to Kelebos fell one after another. Shivering on the ground, the leader of the Dark Serpent Guild, Bert, vomited blood with stern eyes staring at the perpetrator. Why, he couldn't understand why he was suddenly attacked like this. In desperation, Bert tried to make excuses for himself. We did nothing, we never revealed anything." The assassin, who looked like a monster wrapped in a cloth with his face covered, continued to move towards Bert with a cold attitude. "Even so, you still hold the information. Don't worry, if you disappear, no one will know," and the assassin lifted Bert up and strangled him. It didn't take long for him to stop struggling and become a soft corpse thrown back to the ground. Looking down at Bert's body, the assassin took something out of the chest of his shirt, a corrosive solution that could destroy corpses quickly. If this thing was poured down, all traces would be erased immediately. Before acting, the assassin looked around with expressionless eyes. His other colleagues had probably also completed the task without any difficulty, when suddenly a voice rang out, "Corrosive liquid, which was what I used to use when I was young." Seeing it here, I felt so nostalgic again, and at the same time, a man slowly appeared in the darkness like a ghost. The assassin couldn't help but be amazed and slowly turned his head. The mysterious person appeared right behind him, but he didn't even notice his presence. He didn't know when. His fingertips were shaking. Cold sweat rolled down as the assassin looked at the middle-aged man with no outstanding features standing behind him. "You are," Hidos replied casually. "If I say I'm the leader of Talia, do you know?" The assassin's eyes widened. It was the only guild that the Marquis Kelebos clan could not control in this area, but the identity of the leader of the guild was very well concealed. Hidos politely made an offer. "There are many things I want to ask you, so I want you to follow me as quietly as possible." The assassin hesitated. "Then you won't kill me?" Hidos replied in a calm voice. "Yes, I promise." It's an attitude that is not wary of the other party. The assassin had instinctively sensed that Hidos was also an assassin, and the aura he emitted was much stronger than him. He guessed that maybe it was because Hidos also knew the difference in strength between them that he let his guard down like that. Even now, Hidos behaved very politely and seemingly harmlessly, making the assassin even more subjectively think that this time was more appropriate than ever to strike a preemptive strike. Immediately, he fumbled quietly for the dagger hidden under his clothes. In the blink of an eye, the assassin moved closely with a high-swinging blade aimed at Hidos, and in less than 2 seconds, the gap between the two had narrowed to only a few centimeters. Without hesitation, he thrust the dagger into Hidos' heart. He was sure that he would hit it, telling himself that the attack would pierce his heart. No matter how talented he was, carelessness would slow him down a beat. Unfortunately, the result was not what the assassin expected, and the knife stopped at a distance of only a knuckle in front of Hidos. He tried to push the knife further by gripping his trembling hands, but his hand couldn't move another glass. Then, something like a black rope was binding the assassin's body. the darkness was gradually enveloping him. Hido's just shook his head. Such a difference in strength, how dare you attack, what a shame. The assassin couldn't help but recognize the particularly impressive skill that Hido's was using, restraining the darkness. It was impossible. At that moment, his mouth was choked. Hido's pressed his index finger on the tip of his knife and pressed it down. Hey, you've already rejected my offer. So you don't have the right to say anything more, and at the same time, Hido's took off the cloth covering his face, smiled coldly, and then quietly clenched his hands. The moment his index finger left the opponent's blade, the surrounding atmosphere immediately stirred violently. The pitch-black darkness quickly engulfed the assassin without any space left, as if he was falling into a swamp. He tried to struggle but could do nothing more and sank into despair. Hido's smiled with satisfaction and turned his back, his hands clasped behind his back, waiting patiently for the rest of the night. At that moment, Mia appeared and called, and his father, Hido's, immediately turned to his daughter, who was waiting for Mia. Mia was carrying the other 3 assassins dressed like the one who had just been killed by Hido's. He smiled and comforted his daughter, who was carrying the cuffs on the backs of the 3 men. You have fought hard, Mia. Mia seemed to be just a little hot, so she was sweating and didn't feel too tired. She hurriedly reported it to Hido's. 2 of them had drunk poison on the spot, so I couldn't get them to go. Hido's nodded with a satisfied smile. Okay, these 3 people alone are enough information for us to exploit. Then, Hido's muttered in a mocking voice, bringing these people out in the current situation, it seemed that the Kelebos family was really desperate, just as the hero said. Hido's looked around with cold eyes. There was a terrible commotion in this area. All those who had been in contact with Kelebos were killed for keeping quiet, without having to think twice to know who was behind this massacre. Hido's realized from the first time he set foot here, the crime in the capital's underworld was particularly bad. It was too dirty and depraved to be an organization run and backed by one of the 4 great families. If this fact was revealed, Marquis Kelebos will suffer a heavy blow. The more Hido's thought about it, the more excited he became, because it seemed like Mikhail was holding everything in his hand. Interesting, I don't know what the hero would do with these guys. Meanwhile, at the central temple in the capital, Mikhail is receiving an important guest. Myron had come to Mikhail right after the argument with the Marquis of Kelebos. Of course Mikhail had also guessed it, so he had opened the door to wait for him from the afternoon. After a long silence, Myron finally spoke with a dark expression. I'm here to ask for your help, Mikhail asked calmly. What's wrong? Myron's expression got worse and worse, his hands that were intertwined began to tremble. I'm not sure, but I think that possibility can't be completely ignored. Even if he said that, Myron's gaze was now very complicated, as if he didn't know what to do. Mikhail knocked on the table and pretended to think for a moment, then softly dropped the sentence. So how did you decide? Myron replied hesitantly. In the family, I decided to accept the fact that there might be a dark period that I didn't know until now. Maybe even that. When Myron said this, his throat choked up, and even though he tried to accept it, it was still hard to believe the conjecture he was thinking of. Mikhail directly intervened to expose the problem. Maybe they were even reaching out to the underworld, right? Hearing that, Myron was stunned for a moment. You know. Mikhail immediately opened his eyes and lied. How can a hero save the world if even these things don't know? Even if it's a matter of the future, I still have to know everything and be prepared. Set on the side pouted sarcastically at Mikhail. I've felt this for a long time, but you're really good at lying without blinking. But as usual, Mikhail ignored her sarcasm because it was really true. He added to Myron, at least, his family's current direction is not very positive. After that, Myron seemed to understand why Mikhail had helped him and asked directly, so the reason you helped me get permission to participate in the affairs outside the palace a few days ago was because, Mikhail smiled and nodded immediately. If he wanted to ask if it was related to Kelebos, I won't deny it, but not with bad intentions. Aren't the gods always looking for the right people for the right things? Mikhail's answer meant that Marquis Kelebos' involvement was real, Myron's face grimacing so horribly that he had to cover his face in agony. But even so, Mikhail could see that Myron's eyes had not completely lost hope, and Myron tried to ask a bitter question. Yes, how much can I, a little boy, can do in this? Although Mikhail was very sympathetic to Myron, he was also steadfast in the thought that he needed to completely smash that hope, certainly not leave anything behind. If Mikhail says something wrong at this time, then the push will no longer work. The situation must be built in such a way that Myron no longer feels stuck because of the betrayal of the clan. He does not want him to be completely insane to the point of killing his father, but I couldn't give a clear line of what he was supposed to do, because Myron hadn't fully faced his father's sins yet, so Mikhail was just talking nonsense. And I don't know. In case Myron didn't know what to do, psychological struggles like this could last indefinitely. After all, he only had deep doubts about his father. In order to strengthen his assertiveness, it was necessary to provide evidence. A proof that could make Myron a turning point for the Kelebos family to change. Mikhail immediately held out his hand as if to signal someone and said to Myron, "I have this for you." Soon after, Hidos appeared in the room with Mia. Hidos didn't say a word, but reached out to the empty seat next to Mikhail's tea table. It was happening so fast that Myron didn't even have time to be surprised. A few face sealers appeared out of nowhere, their entire bodies were tightly bound by the black barbarian wires, and the ropes slowly loosened, causing the assassins who were suspended in the air to slowly fall. The masked assassins fell on the floor. Because they were wearing masks, Myron still couldn't tell who they were. He asked Mikhail with a frown, "Hero, this is?" Mikhail stood up, walked towards the assassins of the Marquis of Kelebos, and explained, these were the assassins who had suddenly attacked the underworld just now. If these people worked together, the number of people who could stop them was only counted on the tip of their fingers, even when searching the entire continent. Everything they had done so far was perfect, because every key area in the underworld had been raided and there were many people from the dark guilds assassinated without leaving a trace. Mikhail paused for a moment, smiling at the assassins lying on their backs. After that, Mikhail turned to ask Myron a question that he couldn't understand. "Isn't this really very sophisticated, Mr. Myron?" At this time, Myron's eyes began to tremble, as if he understood something. Normally, assassins are rarely sent to the Dark Guild's people because of their internal have competed and slaughtered each other very fiercely, but this time it is different, so it is not difficult to recognize that there is something unusual. Mikhail laughed and took off the mask of one of the assassins brought by Hidos. He chose him because he saw that he was wearing a scratched and chipped mask, probably a long-time active member. When he looked at the face behind the assassin's mask, Myron's face was clearly revealed, with a look of astonishment. For a moment, his eyes widened as if his eyeballs were about to pop out, because he knew who the masked man was. Even though Mikhail knew that Myron's reaction would be like that, he still asked him in an attacking voice, "Wasn't this a familiar face?" Myron's slurred voice came out in shock as he looked at the scar-faced assassin, the Krex Butcher. He was a notorious criminal who had swept through the Kelebos estate long ago, a scumbag who had killed dozens of innocent children, raped a woman and beheaded her husband. His swordsmanship and stealth ability were both top-notch, so he hadn't been detected for a long time. But in the end he was still arrested and ordered to be executed by the Marquis of Kelebos. A man who should have been alive made Myron startle to his feet. Why is this criminal here? Mikhail ignored that question because it was something that Myron would ponder for himself. He just walked up to another assassin. "Look at the others as well." Mikhail said that and took off the masks of the rest of the assassins. One by one, the identities of these people were revealed quickly without a cumbersome introduction. Each time it happened, the shock that the Myron suffered was getting bigger and bigger, because they were all criminals who caused terrible disturbances in the Kelebos estate. Myron swallowed bitterly. All of these people had been executed, and the time of execution was also different, but if they were all gathered here, it could only be because of one person's hand. Mikhail laughed coldly and looked at Myron. "I've heard of these names too, they're all notorious, but they're also very capable. It might be a waste to kill them, especially when the crime is bad enough to be punished with death. It doesn't matter how you deal with them, perhaps using them has become a better way." At this moment, Myron trembled from the inside of his heart to the outside of his body. He could no longer deny his father's guilt no matter how much he tried to find a reason to justify him before. Finally, Myron fell to his knees in pain. The feeling of suffocation made his chest seem to explode. Now Mikhail didn't need to say anything more to extinguish Myron's hopes. There was only a cold pile of ashes left in his heart. In another place, Marquis Kelebos was frowning at the sudden news that came in. What did you just say?" His subordinates reiterated cautiously, "I received a report that the people we sent to assassinate the Dark Guild have all been killed." Marquis Kelebos knew better than anyone the power of the criminals he used, so he immediately rolled his eyes with a trembling voice. "I'm sure there is no one in the Dark Council who is so powerful, and yet what nonsense are you talking about? Does it sound funny?" The subordinate who was reporting was also trembling like crazy. "Well, they had evaporated. I heard that it happened suddenly, leaving no trace." Marquis Kelebos' head quickly jumped. he had never doubted the ability of his assassins and it was not difficult to erase the traces in the underworld, yet they failed. The result was different from what he expected. Everything related to the underworld was no longer in the palm of his hand. At that moment, a thought flashed. The conversation between the Marquis of Kelebos and his son in the afternoon suddenly came to his mind, and he asked the hero for help, and the Marquis of Kelebos immediately confirmed that Mikhail had deliberately approached his son and contributed to exposing the truth about the underworld involving him. The assassins who were created to do the dirty work of the Kelebos clan were quietly defeated easily, which obviously meant that everything had been planned and prepared for a long time, and the results of the assassins' failure were proof that Mikhail had been waiting for this opportunity. Marquis Kelebos couldn't help but shudder because Mikhail seemed to know everything he had done and would do. Curses filled his boiling brain. The bastard, Mikhail Walpurgis, the heir and hero of the damned Walpurgis family, and also, her son. Marquis Kelebos judged very quickly that Mikhail was the source of all the troubles, and may even have noticed the relationship between the Kelebos family and the Dark Guild. Now that the problem could not be solved by his subordinates anymore, Marquis Kelebos had to come out in person. He impatiently asked his subordinate's name, where Mikhail Walpurgis was now, and the subordinate stammered, "That's the Central Temple." Marquis Kelebos gritted his teeth so that the tendons on both sides of his face tensed. He looked through the window towards the Central Temple with red eyes. "I will go see that bastard." When the Marquis of Kelebos arrived at the Central Temple, Myron was no longer there. Changing a future that had been ruined was certainly interesting in many ways, but among them, what made Mikhail most interesting was looking at the heads of the obnoxious people who were tormented by rhymes. He greeted the Marquis of Kelebos with a joyful smile. "Huh, isn't this the Marquis?" Outside, Mikhail was still smiling and pretending to be gentle, but inside his head was already dancing happily. What could be happier than the guys who hated to see him being forced to come to see him because he was desperate? Marquis Kelebos tried to control his expression and said politely, "I haven't seen him for a long time." Mikhail also replied, still with a smile of 3 parts and 7 parts sarcasm, "It had been a long time since I had seen him. Why did the head of a big family come here like this?" Marquis Kelebos almost collapsed at his innocent performance. But Mikhail didn't stop. He teased him again. "Well, of course, since he was a great nobleman, he must have a very great and noble reason worthy of a great family, right?" Marquis Kelebos just glared at Mikhail silently without answering. After restraining his simmering anger, Marquis Kelebos opened his mouth coldly, went to another place and said. Mikhail also indulged in his wishes, for wherever he spoke, it was the same for him. He led him into the center of the temple, an enclosed space out of everyone's reach. It's perfect for intimate conversations. Marquis Kelebos sat across from Mikhail, staring at him with clearly hostile eyes. "We won't have a happy conversation anyway, so let's get straight to the point. Did you do it?" Of course, the insider understood what he was talking about as soon as he heard it, but Mikhail chuckled, seemingly innocent. "I don't know what he was talking about." Marquis Kelebos' expression was even worse when he heard that. He was silent for a moment, as if trying to suppress his emotions, and then continued, "I heard that my son behaved impulsively like that because you seduced him." Mikhail shrugged casually. "You are an impulsive person. People often say that I am, but not to the point of being called impulsive when exposing the person behind the crime of the public. Where's the Dark Guild?" Marquis Kelebos glared at Mikhail for a moment before opening his mouth. "My son is a royal knight for the honor of the family. I warn you again, don't play dirty games with my son anymore." Mikhail laughed sarcastically. "You should explain the reason so that I can accept your warning." "Why shouldn't I do that?" For a moment, Marquis Kelebos fell silent because of Mikhail's difficult question. There must have been a lot of planning going on in his mind. Of course, a clever man like Marquis Kelebos would find some excuse for his abhorrent act. He brazenly asked Mikhail, "Have you ever heard of the phrase necessary evil?" Replied Mikhail, clicking his tongue. According to the Marquis of Kelebos, good and evil are only the simplest mode of evaluation. Necessary evil refers to actions or decisions that are negative or harmful but are considered necessary in a particular context to achieve a larger goal or avoid a more serious consequence. It is considered the worst of the available options, but still the least of the possible consequences of not acting that way. For example, in war, an attack can sometimes be seen as the evil necessary to prevent the enemy from inflicting greater damage. Accordingly, the underworld in the capital was a place full of corruption, so someone needed to control evil, and Marquis Kelebos declared that his clan was the one who took on that role, which was the epitome of necessary evil. Mikhail was a little surprised that the Marquis of Kelebos revealed many things about his family more easily than he expected. He thought it would be good, because Mikhail probably had the evidence, and it was useless to hide it, but his reasoning made Mikhail snort unpleasantly. What do you mean by that? Marquis Kelebos brazenly continued, my clan is controlling the evil of the Holy Kingdom. Do you really think that your majesty doesn't know about this? There can't be only light in this world, you don't even know this world well, so you can naively call everything in the underworld evil, so stubborn. A mocking laugh popped out of Mikhail's mouth when he heard that. Actually, what he said was true. The role of controlling the underworld was certainly that the emperor had tacitly allowed that to happen, but there was a problem that would turn all of Marquis Kelebos' words into a fallacy. Mikhail asked directly, does His Majesty allow the sale of children as slaves? Marquis Kelebos was stunned and silent immediately. He must have thought that the trade of rebels against the royal power would not be a problem. It was the slaves of the young nobles, even children, most of whom were convicted of clan solidarity. Mikhail smiled triumphantly and continued to charge, I am sure that your majesty will not allow such a thing to happen. Of course, even if you do so, your majesty will simply have to throw away a chess piece, and I will be reprimanded a little, but it won't be too much. Marquis Kelebos also knows the truth, as Mikhail guessed. In fact, every nobleman is just a chess piece in the emperor's hand. Without this person, there will be someone else to replace him. After acknowledging this grim truth, Marquis Kelebos exclaimed in a sour voice, you know everything very well. Mikhail suddenly approached the Marquis of Kelebos, whispering in his ear in a high-pitched voice in the posture of a victor, by the way, did you know? Actually, I don't care about anything you're paying attention to. At that moment, the Marquis of Kelebos was dumbfounded. What he was most concerned about was always to bring down Walpurgis, but now Mikhail was declaring that what he was doing was not intended to bring down Kelebos because of the old feud between the two masters. When the Marquis of Kelebos was still wondering why Mikhail had waged war on him so openly, if not as a private enemy, Mikhail took the initiative to explain, do you think I am standing here now as a member of the Walpurgis family, right in the middle of this central temple? Marquis Kelebos' face became stiff. His gaze quickly swept around the central temple, the only place in the capital that belonged to the neutral zone. Mikhail continued to giggle in the ear of the Marquis of Kelebos, I am the heir of the Walpurgis and a subject of the Holy Kingdom, but at least not now, sir. I am a hero, an existence that does not care about the empire, whose goal is to protect the future of all humanity. I mean, I'm in a position where I don't need to worry about whether your actions are as evil as what you're talking about. Stop making ridiculous excuses. Arresting criminals is not a bad thing. Why did he have so many opinions? When he heard these words, all the calculations in Marquis Kelebos' mind collapsed in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter if he was a marquis or a duke. What kind of mother was the necessary evil? Mikhail had declared him a hero, and the hero was not a politician, certainly not a position to compromise or want to compromise with evil. Moreover, it was the mouth of the Marquis Kelebos that revealed something about himself and the Kelebos family. As a necessary villain, Kelebos was involved in criminal activities in the underworld and shook hands with the dark guilds, so Mikhail only gave him two choices. Mikhail asked after holding out two fingers, now, sir, there are only two choices. Either automatically stop participating in the activities of the Dark Guild, or maintain the ideal necessary evil that he had just mentioned. At this time, Marquis Kelebos was in a position where he could no longer raise his head to face Mikhail as before. Mikhail's attitude towards him changed instantly, his gaze became cold and there was no longer his original teasing. I am sure he must choose, right now, right here, in front of me, Marquis Kelebos. Marquis Kelebos' answer was simple. He kicked his chair with a flushed face and left the central temple in a hurry, perhaps thinking that he did not deserve Mikhail's offer of friendship. This reaction was also anticipated by Mikhail. Even if he looked at the problem rationally, he could not immediately stop the business that accounted for a significant part of the family's profits just because of a few threats from Mikhail, and he did not want to listen to him emotionally. Still, Mikhail sighed a little disappointed when the Marquis of Kelebos couldn't control his anger and left in anger, cutting off his only way of retreat and his son's. But Mikhail didn't feel uncomfortable because there was no harvest either. In fact, he brought Marquis Kelebos here not because he thought he would listen to him this time. A few minutes after he left, Mikhail looked at the empty wall in the corner of the room. A question rang out in the air. Had he heard it all? At this moment, a crack appeared in the space hidden in the wall, between the bookshelves, like a space door that was slowly opening. Myron walked out of there with a bitter smile that quickly disappeared. There was no way that the Marquis of Kelebos, who had no knowledge of magic, would be able to recognize his son's presence under the cover of magic. After all, it was important that Myron had heard the conversation earlier. Mikhail didn't need to repeat the question he had asked Myron before. This time he took the initiative to speak up after finding the answer to his path. I had already decided. I'm going to reform my clan. Mikhail was extremely satisfied with Marin's attitude now that he knew the whole truth. He no longer hesitated. He must have gone through enough torment before coming to this decision, but there was no longer a hint of flinching in those eyes. There is only a steadfast will to resist evil. Marquis Kelebos would not have expected that the second son of the Kelebos family had heard everything that no one outside the family had known before. It was information that was only passed on to the heirs. In other words, Myron would not have been able to know these things without digging into the affairs of the underworld or some kind of incident. Actually, Marin's case was a little more special. He was the result of Marquis Kelebos' special creation to enhance Kelebos' honor, so they had deliberately separated him from the illegal deeds of the clan since childhood. The moment Myron was born, he was an existence that was deliberately created to be separate from the dark side of the clan. Because of this, Myron was destined to become the face of honor for the family as a royal knight, regardless of whether he would have to live as a puppet in the hands of his father. Myron is also the remnant of Kelebos' conscience, surrounded from evil and taught with beautiful ideals of righteousness, justice, and courage. There were countless other virtues that had been cultivated in Myron to build the perfect image for a royal knight from a young age. But the envelopment of evil also created a problem that led to the terrible disaster later. That is, Myron was too naive, too confident in the morality of his clan, and lacked a collision with the harsh realities that made his soul as fragile as glass. When such a person learns the grim truth about the family he has always been proud of, about the father he has always respected, it will be a big blow. Fortunately, this time it is not too serious because Mikhail has found out and intervened in time. What Mikhail wanted was for the remnants of the Kelebos clan's conscience to rise, so that the outcome of Myron and the entire clan would change. The only one who would be dragged into the swamp would be the stubborn Marquis Kelebos, and the Kelebos would follow a new path led by Myron. Marin's fists trembled as he acknowledged the truth about his clan, which was the reaction Mikhail had expected from him. The corn boy who had collided with evil was now gone. When I heard Marin's announcement, I had already thought about it. I was going to reform my clan. Mikhail was indeed overjoyed in his heart. The more Myron spoke, the more determined he became, though his voice was still a little choked with shock, that I needed to change my clan. That phrase of necessary evil, just an excuse to justify the wrong things he had done, nothing more, nothing less. Then Myron looked directly at Mikhail. I thought there must be some reason for Hero to tell me the truth and show me this. I think this is what he was expecting. Mikhail clicked his tongue in his heart. As expected, he was really smart. It would be a lie if Mikhail said that he didn't intentionally put Myron in this situation, so he nodded frankly. Well, then let's start planning step by step from now on. Mikhail smiled contentedly in his heart. Although this plan wouldn't be able to be completed in a year or two, it didn't matter. Anyway, the reorganization of the clan would be carried out by Myron, not himself. Myron looked at Mikhail with clear eyes full of integrity. Please lead me, Hero. But Mikhail shook his head. I can't take responsibility for you. If you want to change your clan and spread your thoughts, you have to do it yourself. Of course it won't be easy. As you can see, the Marquis has no intention of changing the direction of the clan. Myron immediately became confused and frowned. I don't know anymore. Mikhail knows the embarrassment that Myron will face. Changing a clan of such a size is not something that can be easily solved overnight. If you take extreme measures, you just need to kill the Marquis of Kelebos. But Mikhail had no intention of letting things go the same way as before he returned. Moreover, Marin's talent would have been more useful if it hadn't been affected by this. Mikhail then gave him advice. Do what you want to do. All you need to do is do what you think is right. Just one thing, don't falter. Mikhail smiled and looked into Marin's eyes to reassure him, as well as hypnotically, using Marin's trust in the hero's words to motivate him to be more confident in the path he had chosen. Mikhail said slowly as Marin's facial muscles slowly relaxed, don't forget the feelings in your heart right now, don't indulge in excessive hatred, but don't be as indifferent as an outsider. This is both easy and difficult, but Mikhail believes that Myron will be fine, and he will even grow well on the other side. If so, Marin's strong growth will have a deterrent effect and become a restraint for Kelebos. Myron nodded in agreement with Mikhail's advice with a resolute expression as if affirming that he would remember these words for the rest of his life. Mikhail also smiled kindly and patted Myron on the shoulder to encourage and give him the task of suggesting a path for him. Periodically investigate the underworld and report to me. Do you agree? Myron nodded immediately. I will report to you what happened in the underworld after investigating the Dark Guild," Mikhail added. "If you need help, you can go to the church or my clan, don't hesitate." Mikhail feels very satisfied that things are going according to his expectations, but he also wonders whether honor will prevail or necessity will prevail. Of course Mikhail leans towards the first thing. Now Myron won't have to worry too much anymore, his potential and will are really outstanding. Mikhail excitedly turned around and left the room first. "Then let's get started." Myron also followed with his eyes burning with determination. After Marquis Kelebos returned from the temple, it had been a long time since he was able to calm down. Under normal circumstances, he would not lose his temper because of this kind of anger. The problem was that the opponent this time was Walpurgis. The Marquis of Kelebos kept cursing, "That bastard, how dare he do that?" He thought the Kelebos clan would collapse if something about the underworld was revealed, as long as it was stopped with money and power. Who did he think he was? After venting his anger on his belongings, Marquis Kelebos tried to regain his composure and reassure himself that Mikhail would not be able to do anything, because he believed that no matter how weak he was, the Kelebos family was still one of the 4 great families, and could still afford to get out of it. Marquis Kelebos took a deep breath and said to himself, there was no way he could clean up the entire underworld of the empire on his own. A threat, after all, wasn't this a necessary evil that the emperor also tacitly agreed to? Although the words of a hero cannot be taken lightly, the Kelebos clan is not so weak as to be pushed back by the hero. Never. Marquis Kelebos is confident in that. However, for now, he still decides that he needs to make a little concession. Because if the emperor hears about this, it will not be good for the Kelebos family. The plan of response was quickly shaped in the mind of the Marquis of Kelebos. First of all, he would call Myron back. It was time to destroy his career as a royal knight, but he would not give up his business in the underworld. The business will have to be stamped a little, the income will of course decrease and you will have to pay more careful attention, but this is an acceptable loss to some extent. The Marquis of Kelebos also planned to imprison Myron in the Kelebos estate and keep it a secret from his family for a while, rather than let the underworld be stirred up by him in the spirit of righteousness. Marquis Kelebos diligently analyzed the situation in his mind. It can be said that this time Walpurgis provoked him first. The problem is that Mikhail still has the support of the church, but the great devil has been cleansed so the church cannot accuse him of being related to the demons. Moreover, the emperor also did not want to let the balance of the empire be shaken by the collapse of a large family. Carefully considering all aspects, Marquis Kelebos muttered maliciously, "Brat, you don't even know how this world works, so you dare to speak out so loudly." Nearly half a day had passed since the hostilities against Walpurgis had so broken out in the Marquis of Kelebos' room, and the next morning his subordinate rushed in with a look of haste. "Sir." Before leaving the capital after completing the work assigned by the Marquis of Kelebos, the subordinate suddenly returned to meet him with a pale expression that made him worried. "What, something suddenly happened?" The subordinate gasped and said, "Just now, Archbishop Ali made an official announcement. In the church." Marquis Kelebos immediately had a bad premonition. What? He tried his best to erase the assumptions that came to his mind, but the subordinate's next words were like a blow to his head. They said, the church and the young master had decided to carry out the campaign under the slogan of overthrowing the underworld. Marquis Kelebos' face became stiff in agony at his subordinate's words. After all, the intention to imprison Myron had been shattered before it even began. Archbishop Ali stood up and emitted a blue glow with excitement. "Haha, just as expected from the hero. He has never let us down." Archbishop Ali welcomes Mikhail and Myron with open arms, but neither of them intends to give him warm hugs. Even so, Archbishop Ali still stretched out his hands with a gentle smile, not expecting him to make such a quick decision in such a short time. Myron looked at Archbishop Ali's friendly face with a worried smile. Was this possible? The Archbishop Ali immediately raised his hand, and in his hand suddenly appeared a pure white spiked mace. Although the Holy Kingdom no longer held as much power as before, but the Holy Kingdom is still a Holy Kingdom, and there are temples all over the Holy Kingdom, which is an obvious truth. Archbishop Ali swung his spiked mace and grinned. "Shouldn't we just break the heads of the demons?" Mikhail replied, "Of course, if the demons were hiding in the underworld." Mikhail knew better than anyone else. Although Archbishop Ali looked like a benevolent cultivator now, he had a pretty resounding reputation in his youth, crushing demons. Archbishop Ali was one of the talented inquisitors of heresy, and among many archbishops, he accomplished many feats by personally smashing the devil's head. After that, Mikhail happily introduced Myron to Archbishop Ali. "With the help of Brother Myron, we will be done soon." However, Archbishop Ali looked at Myron with doubtful eyes. The second son of the Kelebos family. Myron wasn't angry at his father's bad reputation, he just bowed his head humbly and waited for Mikhail to explain it to Archbishop Ali. Just because he was a member of the Kelebos clan didn't mean he was the same as the rest of the clan, you can trust him. After the two sides got to know each other, Mikhail smiled brightly and said to them, "Please break up the dark guilds in this capital, this opportunity is rarely given to those who hold the title of Royal Knight." Archbishop Ali clenched the spiked mace in his hand excitedly, "Yes." After that, Mikhail came back and told Myron, "Brother Myron, I will leave the rest to you, don't forget what I said, if necessary, you can use my name to get support, His Majesty the Emperor has promised to support us, and even personally handed over the symbol." Myron nodded resolutely, "Yes, I'll be cautious." At that moment, a shout echoed from outside the church, "Mikhail Walpurgis," and Mikhail turned his head calmly because he knew he was going to come anyway. Marquis Kelebos was rushing towards Mikhail with an angry expression. "What the hell do you think you are doing? What kind of outsider like you has to interfere in the affairs of the capital? What is this? Being the head of a great family, I see that this is an act beyond authority, in the capital, where His Majesty is staying. What's the matter?" Mikhail and Mayan heard the scolding of the Marquis of Kelebos and remained as casual as nothing. After a while, Mikhail laughed mockingly, "Haha, Marquis, what are you talking about? This is the Royal Knight who has been authorized by His Majesty to investigate the Dark Council," Mikhail said as he stretched out his hand towards Myron, showing that this was no longer his responsibility, but that it was headed by Myron. Marquis Kelebos turned to look at his son with an angry face. "Myron, what are you doing? To protect the honor of our family, you should be." Myron replied without hesitation, "I don't know, father." Marquis Kelebos immediately glared at his son in amazement. "What?" However, there was still no sign of flinching on Maron's face. He explained smoothly, "Your Majesty has allowed me to investigate, and I have officially received the authority to investigate the underworld. You have to do what you think is right. If you are really my father, whom you have always trusted and know what honor is, I will not stop you." The moment Myron passed by the Marquis of Kelebos, it was also a silent act of declaring that he would no longer be a Kelebos. Marquis Kelebos watched his son pass by with his face as if it was about to explode at any moment and shouted in a very angry voice, "Myron Kelebos," but now it didn't make any sense. After listening to last night's conversation, the relationship between father and son had broken irretrievably. He turned around and glared at Myron. "Do you want to be excluded from the clan? You don't even pay attention to my words. Do it yourself," Myron declared firmly, "then just do it. But no matter what you do, you won't give up on what you're doing, so give up," and Myron walked straight without even looking back at the father who was blushing with anger. At this moment, Mikhail also walked past Marquis Kelebos with a hum, which is what he said. Marquis Kelebos immediately turned around and reflexively glared at Mikhail and blamed him. "You were the one who was behind the plan for this, right?" Mikhail burst out with a satisfied smile and threw his face into the sky. "I'm just doing what a hero should do." Hearing that, Marquis Kelebos glared at Mikhail as if he wanted to kill him, but couldn't say anything more. Mikhail chuckled in his heart. It was all up to him to do it himself. This time, he wanted to make the most of the power that the Emperor gave him. No matter what the Marquis did or said, nothing could stop what had been supported by the Emperor, and that was the beginning of a bloody purge. After Archbishop Ali made the official announcement that he would purify the underworld and make Marquis Kelebos blush bitterly, Mikhail was able to sit aside and watch things and not have to get involved in anything in the capital at all. Raising his head and looking at the sky of the capital that seemed to be clearer than usual, Mikhail clicked his tongue and said to Set, "Now is the time for us to leave here, the pastime is worth it." Set looked at Mikhail worriedly. "Wasn't he a little too aggressive earlier? Is it really okay? They are one of the big families." Mikhail just shrugged casually. "Okay, Myron will take care of this." From the very beginning when he chose this approach, Mikhail knew there would be no way to force the Marquis of Kelebos to suffer losses so great as to collapse, but he really didn't feel the need to worry anymore and left the capital that very day because he believed in Myron. And when night falls, the purge of the devil's minions had begun, and no matter what Marquis Kelebos did or said, nothing could stop what had been decided. Archbishop Ali held up his mace and shouted, "Cleanse." He showed full solemnity in his intention to smash the heads of the heretics at any moment. And that was the beginning. The archbishop and members of the central temple, led by Myron, spilled into the underworld and discovered many traces of crime. The guild leaders were beheaded within days, and the chaotic underworld was quickly stabilized. In just 3 days, the gloomy underworld of the capital that the Marquis Kelebos family had worked so hard to build for a long time was completely destroyed. By that time, Mikhail had already left the capital, but he believed that if Myron had made up his mind to do this, he could have cleaned up other problems on his own afterwards. Since he was no longer in the capital, Mikhail could not see firsthand how grand the purge was, he only heard the story after the purge was over. When the emperor heard about the results of the purge, it was said that he giggled for a long time. Back on the day Mikhail left the capital, he said to Set with a sly smile, "I don't even have to put much effort into this, Myron has put himself into this decision and he will do everything he can even if it means tears. When he was struggling with difficult choices, I just had to intervene a little and guide him," and without hesitation, Mikhail stepped into the carriage without hesitation. Set can't tell at all if Mikhail was a sinister schemer who used Myron for the purpose of destroying the Marquis of Kelebos, or if he was a kind person who wanted to save Myron from the misery and torment of discovering the truth about his father. After thinking for a while and still not coming to a perfect conclusion, Set grumbled, his personality was really strange. Mikhail heard it but didn't seem to listen, because he was too lazy to explain what he was doing. Some time later, 2 years had passed since Mikhail's return, and a year and a half had passed since he returned to the land of Draculion from the capital. Mikhail walked in a satisfied mood when he looked at the grass and trees around. It was not long but a lot of things had changed, although there were still no high-rise buildings or solid walls built in this land, but it had become really livable. In other words, according to Mikhail, the place has become at least a land that can be inhabited by humans, which is still objectively not very attractive, but for a landscape created in less than 2 years, it is still very commendable. Seeing Mikhail again, Teeps bowed his head respectfully. If it weren't for the hero, this place would have been abandoned forever and become a ruin. "Thank you very much," Mikhail replied to Teeps with a leisurely smile, "I'm just doing what needs to be done." About a week ago, Teeps returned to Draculion with about 30 demon hunters he had found. As Mikhail looked down at the demon hunters' training ground, they were concentrating on practicing duels with each other enthusiastically. There are demon hunters that Mikhail seems to have met several times before his return, and there are also people he has never met before. Among them, there are people who are cursed by werewolves. There are also people who are cursed by demon-eyed demons and have demonic eyes. Teeps looked at the demon hunters with sympathetic eyes. Weren't most of them people who were not welcomed by this world? Mikhail nodded and replied, "Yes, that's why I asked you to contact those people in the first place." By the time Mikhail and Teeps approached, the eyes of the hunters who were concentrating on training all turned towards the two of them, the chieftains and the lords. The hunter was cursed by the werewolf. Ansbach greeted Mikhail and Teeps with a gloomy voice. Of course, that expression was no one's own, but most demon hunters were. Mikhail knew Ansbach's story, so he asked him, "Are you still having nightmares?" Ansbach shook his head bitterly. There was no way to stop it. Ansbach's hand trembled in helplessness and pain as he recalled his past. "Because of those damn demons, I killed my family with my own hands." Just as Teeps was considered a devil and the family was completely ruined, all the demon hunters here have a tragedy related to the devil. Most of the victims will go crazy, and only those who are not crazy will wander the world and claim to be demon hunters. Afterwards, the woman behind Ansbach doubted or asked, "Hero, if we stay here we will really be able to destroy those demons?" Mikhail immediately gave them advice. First, to practice. The most important thing is to maintain a strong position, not to let hatred dominate. Mikhail decided not to say that hating someone was unconditionally wrong. Because there is nothing wrong with their hatred for the devil, their hatred for the devil is completely justified. They can resist the devil based on that. However, Mikhail must prevent a catastrophe when a grudge against the devil will blind the demon hunters and kill even the innocent, because humanity gradually becomes discriminatory against them. So among the hunters, there are those who will cross the line because they are eaten away by hatred. Fortunately, Mikhail had a way. Mikhail turned to Teeps again and asked, "Mr. Teeps, how was the story I told you before?" Teeps nodded and replied, "Well, everything is ready." After pausing for a moment, Teeps frowned slightly and added, "But to be honest, I still felt uncomfortable." Although Mikhail didn't seem surprised by Teeps' complaint, Teeps was cautious to explain, "I fully trust your decision, but do we really have to do it?" Mikhail is not surprised by Teeps' thoughts because in a way, it is also the source of all evil, the origin of the tragedy of Draculion and Teeps himself. But Mikhail felt that as long as Teeps could overcome this small psychological barrier, their work of saving the world would be easier, so Mikhail did not hesitate to affirm, "Of course." Back in time a few days earlier, in young Leon's dream, as usual, his body rolled back pathetically as he fought with his own adult illusion. The young Leon was thrown tens of meters away by the rock and slammed into the wall, forming a large hole. The building even shook for a moment because of the aftershocks of the powerful kick. The adult Leon smiled and looked at the image of his past, coughing up blood. "Look, you are still so weak." Spitting out blood, Leon tried to get up with a curse. Damn, his body was now full of wounds. He could barely launch an effective blow while the adult Leon was really amazingly strong. The gap between them would not be easily narrowed. The adult Leon let go of the ridicule. "You are really a stubborn boy." "Well, I was also a little stubborn when I was young." Although he is just an imaginary character, the adult Leon says a lot of things and does many things like a living person, which makes young Leon feel uncomfortable spitting blood out of his mouth again. "You are really paranoid and ridiculous." Young Leon picked up his sword again, but he didn't really see any loopholes, even though he was a little better than the first time. At first, the young Leon couldn't even realize that the adult Leon had no loopholes. The points that he thought were loopholes turned out to be not. After many misjudgments, the young Leon understood that he could not judge his opponent recklessly, and he again aimed at the blind spot of the adult Leon. Young Leon quickly swept his eyes and watched the adult Leon take a turn while holding the sword. There was still no gap in his sight, but it took time to find a way out. Instead of continuing to hesitate to wait for an invisible void to appear, young Leon thought it would be better to quickly advance to preemptively attack the opponent. He immediately closed the gap and wrapped his aura sword as much as possible. In the meantime, adult Leon just leisurely chewed the grass in his mouth. There was no sign that the adult Leon's sword would be raised, but the young Leon continued to close. A fleeting feeling of excitement ran through his body and slowly spread out. The true value of Mullier's cultivation chi was the power that could be used not only in aura. Of course, Mullier's cultivation chi also had a limit on the level of using other types of power, but after all, apart from aura, cultivators could completely tolerate and use other types of power. For example, the young Leon reached out the hilt of the sword behind his waist and swung it. While using his full strength, he increased the speed as much as he could and aimed at the side of the adult Leon's side. The adult Leon immediately realized that it was a divine force. The young Leon's damaged muscles were instantly restored by the divine power that spread throughout his body, and that helped him unleash his power to a new level. However, the young Leon didn't seem to know that what he was using was the force. He was just using it to attack the adult Leon instinctively. That proves that the young Leon is a genius, but at the same time proves that he is still immature. Normally, with this level of power, young Leon can take down quite a few opponents with just one blow. But even in the face of that blow, the adult Leon was not panicked, but only surprised and excited. Young Leon felt that he was full of fighting power and swung his sword with sharp eyes. This time, things would be different. The blade pulled across a sharp curve in the air, creating a semicircular trail of light that tore through the wind and rushed towards the adult Leon. But the adult Leon just smiled casually as if he saw that his past was ridiculous. "So fast, you are much more mature." In the blink of an eye, the sound of teeth crackling sounded along with the sound of something being torn apart. Young Leon must have slashed at the adult Leon, but, somehow, his blade shattered in the adult Leon's sarcasm, but all he had was to go faster. For a moment, young Leon felt a sharp pain in his lower back, and before he could judge what had just happened, he was kicked out. The adult Leon blocked the young Leon's attack and even counterattacked, causing the young Leon to fall to the ground. Of course, that was just the assumption of the young Leon because he didn't even see any signs of an attack. When and how the adult Leon counterattacked, he couldn't see it at all. He had good sense and eyes, but he couldn't even feel the attack. That's why the adult Leon still laughed and laughed. "You were thinking that you didn't see me attacking you all the time." Seeing that young Leon only glared in frustration, the adult Leon tapped himself on the head and continued, "You are stupid. It's not that you can't see. It's that you can't see it." Young Leon, who was rolling on the ground embarrassedly, suddenly sat up seriously and stopped frowning. The grown Leon also shows a rare serious side, which means that you have neglected the things that you can use and the things that you can achieve. However, the young Leon still didn't understand what the adult Leon meant, and his eyebrows were suspicious. "What?" Instead of explaining, the adult Leon asked the young Leon, who was Mullier, and the young Leon pondered for a moment and then answered hesitantly, "A famous swordsman." The adult Leon immediately giggled and waved his hand. "No, no, no, it was just a sidewalk story that people spread all over the streets. I don't know why, but young Leon finds the smile of the grown Leon to look disgusting, and what he reveals later is even more shocking: Mullier, the king of everything. Young Leon opened his eyes wide in surprise, but the laughter of the adult Leon grew louder and louder. So, Mullier's existence was just one of the masks used by the king of all things as a swordsman, and when Leon grew up talking about this, Leon's mind was completely stunned. Such things are called personas, which means an appearance that someone wants to show others. This is a word that comes from the actors and a mask that matches the role they will be using during the costume. Hearing this, young Leon was still just a hazy fog in his mind. What do you mean? Adult Leon couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, stupid bastard, isn't it time for you to understand this?" Then, the adult Leon pointed to young Leon's forehead. In the end, he was willing to explain a little more. The true chi cultivation method provides you with a way out of all obstacles, but you don't intend to follow it and just hold your sword intently. You didn't even care about the origin of the cultivation method because you had been swallowed up by the swordsman's ego. Hearing that, young Leon opened his eyes in surprise as if he understood something. Looking at the shattered sword on the ground, the adult Leon further emphasized, "That is, it is not that you are completely impossible, you could have done it before, but now you just don't." Going back to Mikhail and Teep's conversation, there were many reasons why Mikhail insisted on making a special request to Teeps despite knowing that this might make Teeps uncomfortable. This was something that Mikhail thought he had to do, and what he wanted Teeps to do was to reuse Nephthys' fantasy dungeon. Mikhail frankly told Teeps, it would probably be cruel to take advantage of the kindness of Nephthys, the guardian of that place, but this is not a bad thing, it depends on how we use the dungeon. Nephthys' illusion would have a very good effect if she knew the limit, but anyway, the karma Nephthys caused would not be easily solved. Teeps couldn't stop worrying about this. "I know, her ability can help heal mental wounds. But to be honest, I couldn't look at it as a good thing. Of course, I knew my father had crossed the line first." Remembering his father and what happened after he was immersed in a dream, Teeps's hand unconsciously clenched in pain. To be honest, Mikhail also knew that he was very cruel when he asked Teeps to do this. Because it can be said that that fantasy dungeon along with Nephthys' kindness is the origin of the tragedy of the Draculian family. However, since this is Teeps, Mikhail believes that he will overcome this psychological problem. After all, Teeps has already overcome a lot of things. Even without Mikhail's help, it will be fine. Mikhail put his hand on Teep's shoulder and gave him a few pats to show his trust. "I know, but if it was you, I believe you were strong enough to overcome this." Teeps couldn't help but bow his head appreciatively, "Thanking you for trusting me." It's okay for Teeps without the help of the dungeon, but with those demon hunters, things are different. Mikhail looked around and said to the other hunters, "In order to prevent everyone's hatred from getting out of control, I was going to try a measure." Ansbach and the hunters immediately became excited, and in a way, Mikhail nodded and replied, "It was a simple illusion." This illusion was also very sweet, and as soon as he finished speaking, Mikhail tried to smile as kindly as he could, but he looked a little sinister from every angle. After thinking for a moment, Mikhail muttered to himself with thoughtful eyes, "Ah, no, maybe it's more cruel than anything else. Every demon hunter gathered here has something in common, losing a precious person to the devil's deception. In one way or another, a part of the human psyche has been deeply hurt and the delusion will probably evoke some of their loss." Mikhail remembered the conversation with Nephthys a few days ago. She nodded to him in a firm voice, "Now I can do it. Please leave it to me, I will definitely not fail this time." At this time, Mikhail just looked at Nephthys with indifferent eyes. He hadn't seen her for a long time before Teeps returned to this land. Nephthys spoke to Mikhail in a serious voice. Perhaps because she was quite desperate during that forgotten time, she was simply asking for a chance to correct some of her mistakes, and Mikhail didn't feel that it was bad either. If she could correct that selfish kindness, her powers can definitely be used to good use. Recalling Nephthys' pleading attitude, Mikhail believing that she was deeply remorseful and would know where to stop, he looked towards the dungeon with a smile full of expectation. "Anyway, let's wait and see." Afterwards, the demon hunters headed towards the fantasy dungeon under the guidance of Teeps with confused expressions. Mikhail waved to them with a sigh of relief, and Teeps and Nephthys would take care of the rest, so there was no work for today. Just as Mikhail was about to rest his stomach for a while, Leon's eager voice sounded from the distance, "Hey." Mikhail turned his head to say hello when he heard the sudden call, but the sight he saw left him speechless for a moment. After escaping the shock for a short time, Mikhail complained, "What the hell did he do? Why did he end up like this?" Leon limped on crutches, as if he had fallen into the abyss and not dead, and even with only one healthy leg left, he grinned like an idiot. Leon continued to smile with a satisfied expression that made Mikhail no longer understand what the hell had happened. Then, as if he had just made an important decision, Leon suddenly threw his crutches away, looking. "This was a great start for me to reach the next level," Leon said it in a solemn voice and walked forward with his legs bandaged. He pushed his injured leg forward without hesitation. "I was about to step closer to the god." With a cruel crackle, Leon's leg was broken again and he fell to the ground. Funny and pitiful, Mikhail had a hard time not laughing at this scene. Leon stretched like a leech with 3 of the 4 limbs bandaged. My legs, Mikhail ran out of words to him, "just like this, you are really about to get close to the gods." Leon's tears flowed, as if he felt sorry for his miserable situation, but in Mikhail's eyes his actions were silly. The loud cry still lasted for a while afterwards. Mikhail waited patiently for Leon to finish screaming before stepping closer, so, he realized that he could use his divine power. And these days he just wanted to prove this, to the point of almost losing his life. Lying on the ground, Leon replied confidently, "Yes, it was very, very special," but looking at the sweat flowing down his forehead, it seemed that he was not confident at all in his heart. Mikhail sighed silently in his heart. What to do with this bastard? As if reading that discriminatory gaze, Leon tried to be strong. Hey, after all, being a human means accepting stumbling in order to achieve his goal. In the next second, Leon cried out again, "Ah, I've misaligned my jaw." Mikhail sighed even more. "Don't talk nonsense." He was silently cursing Leon in his heart. Just by opening his mouth, he could make a dog bark, but there was also something surprising. Just realizing the divine power was already a big improvement. Surely it was important not only to know the concept of the divine force, but also to be aware of it. This meant that Leon had finally realized the true nature of Mullier's cultivation chi. Mikhail clicked his tongue and praised it tearfully, so he understood. Good. Leon gasped in surprise. "You know," Mikhail nodded his mouth, "of course. What kind of person is Mullier and why he disappeared?" "What I know is something like that." Mikhail didn't say it before because he thought it wouldn't help Leon's growth. Leon sat up seriously. "I haven't even heard of it before." Mikhail indifferently turned to look away. "Then find out for yourself. I don't intend to explain anything to you." Mikhail thinks that if it is explained thoroughly from the beginning, there is a high chance that Leon's self-awareness process will be stalled. Afterwards, Mikhail kindly encouraged Leon, but one thing was certain, as he said, although what he did seemed absurd, but it was not in vain. Hearing that, Leon looked at Mikhail with a surprised expression. Leon asked in an appreciative voice, "Don't you think I'm pathetic?" Mikhail replied bluntly, "No, it was true that he was very pathetic to die, but it was also useful." Leon's face grimaced but he couldn't refute. Anyway, Mikhail finds the way Leon is gradually approaching his future looks pretty cool, even if it's a little silly, because he's moving faster on his way to becoming a master. Before Mikhail's return, Leon had not yet attained the level of a master. But it's not because he's not talented enough, it's because he doesn't have enough time, but Mikhail believes that this time will definitely be different. While Leon was using his other healthy leg to kick Mikhail to vent his anger, he was engrossed in thinking about something else. Firstly, the training that Leon was doing now alone could shorten that time a lot. Moreover, Mullier's cultivation chi was a cultivation method to become a more perfect warrior. Of course, even if Leon could use both divine power and mana, there were still strict limits on other types of power besides aura, but the wide range of applications of this cultivation method was the key to bringing Leon to the level of a master. His current pathetic appearance was also necessary for his growth. Leaving Leon's stone board, Mikhail continued, "The idea of using the force was correct. There was something that could be achieved somehow in the process of failure. Anyway, it was better to listen to the words from his potential illusion." Leon replied innocently. "The guy said, 'The more I get hurt, the more I understand.'" Mikhail laughed at that humorous advice. Well, that's not wrong. But in his heart, he was silently thinking, normally people would not use such stupid measures. The reason was simple, because it was scary and painful. Few people had the courage to be injured from head to toe like Leon is now. It is not that there is no other choice, but it is necessary to go on a thorny road like this. But Leon was different from ordinary people. He wasn't afraid of that at all. Even if he did, he was willing to endure anything to go further. Leon stood up, grinned, and then removed the bandages all over his body without any hesitation, leaving only the bandaged leg that had just broken again and the crutches at his side. Leon was the kind of person who didn't need Mikhail to worry about him growing up. he had a strong desire to overcome and become stronger on his own. Mikhail didn't feel the need to offer another option to a guy who was trying so desperately. Leon carried a large package of medicine and swung at his head. Very good, I will continue to be engaged. I also have a medicine for wounds. I have it, I can do anything. Leon was indeed a guy with a strong desire to win. Looking at him like that reminded Mikhail of the old memories of the two of them in their previous lives. Immediately afterwards, Mikhail was in an exposed mood and made a suggestion. Okay, I'll help you. Leon was startled as soon as he heard it. Then he giggled wryly. Oh, no, no need, I can take care of myself. A normal person would probably respect Leon's refusal, which is normal among normal relationships, but Mikhail is different. He has an unmistakably cunning smile. Immediately afterwards, Mikhail's mana formed transparent crystals like arrowheads. I'm burning with energy. At this level, let's taste it, it's going to be fun. Sensing something, Leon immediately took a step back instinctively. The thought of running away flashed in his mind and he hurriedly turned around and ran instead of just stepping back. Leon ran away from Mikhail with his crutches tapping on the ground, a series of movements as fast as the wind. Leon ran and gasped for breath. Oh no, what kind of dog is this? I need to run out of here right away. But it was too late, and Leon had not run very far when Mikhail used a binding spell that caused him to fall to the ground. Mikhail casually walked towards Leon with an evil smile like a demon. If you don't risk your life to train, how can everything work? Leon turned his head to look at Mikhail in horror. I want to be stronger in the usual way, bastard, please, your training has no humanity at all. Mikhail smiled brightly. There is no humanity, where is there a humane person like me? Regardless of whether Leon agreed or not, Mikhail continued to talk endlessly about the training method he wanted to adopt. To be honest, now that I think about it, this training wouldn't have been effective without a sense of urgency. People on the line of life and death could do anything, Leon was dumbfounded by Mikhail's argument and could only swallow bitterly. This bastard. Mikhail just smiled and summoned magic arrows filled with thunder, which hovered like a death sentence hanging over Leon's head. Leon's mouth gasped in horror. Hey, I'm injured. It's not strange to lie in bed. You have to let me recover. Mikhail raised his index finger to the sky and turned one down with a big smile. I don't know. Countless magic arrows instantly bounced down at the command from the tip of Mikhail's index finger and aimed at Leon, creating a majestic scene like falling meteors. A desperate scream rang out. Mikhail, the bastard, interspersed with explosions like a symphony. Mikhail smiled happily like a conductor waving his hand excitedly against the background of loud bursts of energy. Well, how comfortable this sound was. Another month passed, nothing special happened during that time. Teeps turned to Mikhail to share the results of their experiment. Hero, I think this is very effective. The psychological trauma of the demon hunters sent to Nephthys' fantasy dungeon has gradually shown signs of improving. This time it was different. Nephthys didn't repeat that mistake again. Teeps was worried that people were too dependent on illusions, but this time Nephthys seemed quite coordinated and restrained. In essence, Nephthys' power can be brought to good effect as long as it is used properly, which is why she was given this task. It would be more accurate to consider it as the redemption opportunity that Mikhail gave her. Fortunately, it seems that she didn't waste the opportunity this time. Mikhail made his way to the dungeon shortly after his meeting with Teeps, the fantasy world from the outside that was still as beautiful as it was from the outside. Mikhail entered the dungeon without hesitation, stepping through the bubble film that was a dreamlike world. The dungeon had changed a lot from the first time Mikhail had entered this place. And it was as if Nephthys knew he was coming, so he waited for him with warm cups of tea on the table. He came. Mikhail nodded slightly. I heard that she had healed all the wounds of the visitors. Nephthys smiled wryly. I can't do the same thing wrong twice. Oh my god, now I understand what stupidity can do. Then Nephthys looked over Mikhail's shoulder and greeted Set. Did she agree to that? Set suddenly changed to her true form. Now, after more than a year, this ability has grown significantly. She has reached the point where she can maintain her body for quite a long time. Nephthys' eyes widened when she saw that scene. This look, so she had finally regained her inherent ability. Set chuckled while shaking her head. Unfortunately not yet. Nephthys looked at Set with warm eyes. She said not yet, which meant she could get them back. I was so glad. It seemed as if she had at least been freed from the past, and Nephthys' voice suddenly sank, as if she had just remembered sad stories in the distance. Set also becomes sad for a moment when he hears Nephthys reminisce about the past. In response to Nephthys' heart, Set said firmly, I have never been freed, and Nephthys' relieved face became heavy when he heard that. Mikhail just glanced at the two of them silently without intervening, wondering if he could hear any clues about Set's past that he was still curious about. After a few seconds of choking, Set clenched his fists and emphasized his thoughts to Nephthys, and I had no intention of doing so. Mikhail felt that the story was becoming more and more fascinating and even held his breath waiting to see what happened next. However, just as Nephthys was about to give some advice and reveal more about Set's past, Set suddenly interrupted. Enough. Looking at Set's serious and slightly painful face, Nephthys swallowed the words he was about to say. Set's stern words that followed made Nephthys' desire to advise disappear completely, and she knew that the reason I didn't want to see her until now was because of this. Moreover, there was another person here listening, and after speaking, Set glanced at Mikhail and the story he expected was over before it even began. Mikhail couldn't help but regret in his heart, damn, just said that was all he had to stop. Anyway, Mikhail didn't think he could hear anything more, so he immediately changed the subject. I had a question, how could you heal them? If it was a normal hallucination, it wouldn't be easy for them to get rid of it. Nephthys said with a slightly sad smile, I showed them the future. I realized that the past was irreversible no matter what, so I decided to take a slightly different approach, because this time I couldn't make the same mistake as before. At this time, colorful bubbles appeared in the dungeon, shows the scenes that Nephthys showed to the demon hunters. Nephthys showed them the future in which the wishes of those dear to them would be fulfilled. Perhaps someone had dreamed of a beautiful future with their wife, or another dream that the two brothers had promised to achieve success together. Nephthys thought that maybe everyone who walked in here was like that. Their dreams were lost, their hopes had been extinguished in a tragedy that couldn't be controlled for a long time, but it couldn't be solved immediately. They would have to constantly fight nightmares even after seeing the good dreams created by Nephthys. It would be great if they could quickly overcome the trauma and get their hatred under control, but Nephthys knows it's not easy. All she has to do is patiently take her time to heal their minds. Nephthys felt that alone was enough to greatly reduce the hatred and help these demon hunters to be wiser and not go down the path of self-destruction. Mikhail nodded his head in amusement at Nephthys' approach. I'll continue to send them to you and you can just give them a little rest here. Nephthys nodded. After being healed to some extent would be the inner battle of every hunter. They had to overcome themselves and stand up. Teeps was also there, so Mikhail didn't need to worry too much. Staring at Mikhail for a moment, Nephthys suddenly complimented. He had a pair of clear eyes, an eye that could make the right decision, unlike me. Mikhail didn't take the compliment humbly at once. That's right. Well, now I'll move on to the main topic. Nephthys tilted his head in wonder, to the main point. Mikhail walked closer to Nephthys with a heavy look. I'm sure you know this too. The demon lord was about to wake up, and hearing this, Nephthys' face darkened, and the warm air from before had completely disappeared. Even so, Mikhail still had a mischievous smile. I don't know what happened in that mythical era. Asar and the demon lord fought. Asar died and the demon was seriously injured and banished from this world. But at least I have to know a little bit to deal with the demons, right, like what I'm dealing with. Nephthys heard this, his face became even heavier, as if he understood Mikhail's crazy idea. Nephthys asked Mikhail with a gloomy expression, what do you want from me? Mikhail continues to open up. She specializes in dealing with fantasies and dreams. Of course, you can also show me your memories, in that era. Nephthys was so shocked that he stuttered, which means, no way. Mikhail admitted directly, yes, I want to see it with my own eyes. The demon lord, Mikhail declares it with an innocent smile as if it were the simplest idea he has ever come up with. Before his return, Mikhail had seen the demon lord, but that expression was not exactly correct. If it is called a visual manifestation, Mikhail must have seen the demon lord in the final fight before he returned. But the essence of the demon lord he did not grasp. He did not understand the true meaning of being a demon lord and the value of his existence at the top. Mikhail wanted to know the true form of the demon lord, and what it meant for him to reach the realm of the Almighty. That day, on the last front of humanity, Argo, the world's strongest expedition team, couldn't even understand the nature of the demon lord, which is why Mikhail had to know what kind of creature the demon lord was, what it looked like to the guardians like Nephthys and Set. Mikhail probably won't be able to know the details, but at least he needs to know some of the truth. After all, both Set and Nephthys have been waiting for a long time to find someone who can deal with the demon, so he believes that Nephthys will not refuse his request. If a character at the level of Nephthys was really imaginary, she would be able to show an experience that was very similar to her past real experience, but that made her frown. My illusions were absolutely not the normal kind. The demon lord I recreated may not be real, but it may have left irreparable damage in his mind. Mikhail replied casually, I know. Set grumbled and shrugged his shoulders, those words didn't change anything. Mikhail never gave up once he said it. Maybe that was the conclusion that she could also draw herself after meeting him many times. At this time, Set's face showed a clear expression of dissatisfaction but not necessarily hatred for Mikhail. Mikhail smiled slightly and nodded happily, taking it as a compliment. Well, Set was right, I said that because I calculated that I could bear it, and that was also necessary. Nephthys frowned a little as if she didn't want to remember anything about that era, but she also understood that if one knew the enemy well, one could prepare for everything more thoroughly. Besides, she felt that if Mikhail met the Demon Lord, all his worries would become clear and he would find a way to deal with him for the sake of the future, hybrid humans. Nephthys finally nodded after pondering for a long time, and closed his eyes. As Nephthys held out his hand, a bright golden light began to surround Mikhail little by little. While casting the spell, Nephthys told Mikhail that I would show you the scene of that day as you wished. But they were just fragments of memories. Mikhail nodded without hesitation, and that was good enough. In the blink of an eye, Mikhail's mind was transported to another world, where everything around him was gloomy and suffocating, and a feeling of nausea rose up his throat as if he had just ridden a roller coaster. Then, his legs trembled and he knelt down without realizing it, and he reflexively screamed because he felt the pressure on his body was too great. Mikhail's head ached as if it was about to be torn apart, and he couldn't stop breathing heavily. Death, despair, the worst words kept running through Mikhail's head that he couldn't control, as if it was urging him to die. Mikhail slowly glanced around, little by little trying to observe and regain his composure while enduring the pain in his burning eyes. The ground was boiling with rampant lava, the strong smell of blood enveloped the surroundings. Hell, Mikhail couldn't call this place by any other name than that. It was filled with despair and wailing echoed. Corpses were scattered everywhere, among them dragons, are considered the greatest creatures, and terrifying demons. Looking at them, Mikhail naturally remembered, this was the same mythical age he expected to see, but his eyes seemed to be on fire, and his head seemed to be about to explode just by looking at these illusions. The landscape at the time when the Demon Lord existed, that was the end of all decay, not the golden age when life overflows. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and Mikhail reflexively turned his head to look around. Black rain was constantly falling from the sky, and the thick liquid was dripping on the ground, making a sound that was not as clear as ordinary rain. Mikhail reflexively raised his head and stretched out his hand in excitement. There was something very large and untouchable covering the sky, which seemed to be foggy clouds. But when he looked at the raindrops in the palm of his hand, he was shocked to realize that it was not rainwater. It was blood, to be more precise, the blood of a huge creature that was covering part of the sky, blood falling from above like rain, blood flowing from that person's wound. Mikhail realized immediately and turned his head to look back. Then what was behind him right now was. He sees a pair of red eyes behind a hazy fog. However, this red gives off an ominous and dark feeling. Mikhail was sure that it was the Demon Lord, the mastermind who had destroyed the world. The Demon Lord's bright red eyes suddenly flashed in the dense fog. The pain that Mikhail had tried to suppress earlier began to surge in his head. Before he knew it, Mikhail had raised his hand to cover his eyes and dropped his head to the ground, his survival instinct telling him to deny the existence of the Demon Lord that existed in front of him. Instinctively told Mikhail not to see that scene again. Instinct tells him that the Demon Lord is not a creature that humans can understand, and at the same time, it also says that there should be no resistance in this situation. But Mikhail tried to dismiss that cowardly thought. He gritted his teeth, putting his strength into his trembling hands to support his body. After that, Mikhail slowly stood up. His legs had to work hard to bear the pressure around him and resist his instincts. An ambitious smile bloomed on his face. Dead dog, what instinct was? If it was an instinct that didn't dare to resist a creature that wanted to destroy the world, then we would give it up. And finally, thanks to great determination, the vibration within Mikhail gradually subsided. He slowly opened his eyes and raised his head to look at the Demon Lord. His heart pounding echoed in his ears. Mikhail strained his eyes, trying to dispel all the pain to focus on seeing through the fog, which he was about to see, the existence of that damn demon. I need to engrave his appearance into my mind through these eyes, whom I am sure I have never seen clearly before, and so on. Mikhail is getting closer and closer to the truth that he has always expected to see. But at that moment, the eyes of Mikhail and the Demon Lord met, as if it were natural, those terrifyingly red eyes staring at him startled. It would not be an exaggeration to say that there were very few opportunities to witness such exact illusions, but if it was just an illusion, how could this eye contact be so real to Mikhail? As if the existence of the demon lord at this moment was real, his intuition told Mikhail that something was wrong, that he knew of his existence. At the same time, outside of Mikhail's mental world, Set was shouting Nephthys' name, seemingly losing his temper. Nephthys' hands trembled in Set's anxious questioning, "What the hell were you doing?" At the end of their line of sight was Mikhail, who was immersed in fantasy with his eyes closed, and more importantly, something black was squeezing his entire body. Nephthys also couldn't keep her cool and broke out in a cold sweat. "No, it's not me, she's always better at solving imaginary problems than anyone else, so it's inevitable that she's even more confused than Seth." Nephthys was certainly just an imaginary world, no matter how similar it was to reality. In the end it was just a reenactment of the scene at that time, but what was mixing with the recreated imagination was an ominous existence that Nephthys didn't even dare to mention. "This illusion has been invaded by the demon lord." Mikhail was still looking at the demon lord in a daze without knowing what was happening outside. Could he really feel his presence here? The demon lord just grinned, as if he had read Mikhail's thoughts and was silently responding to his question. Soon after, the ground began to shake. An incomprehensible language that echoes like ancient mantras is shaking the space. Intuitively, Mikhail realized that this was no longer a fantasy, it was too ominous and too grand to be just an imaginary scene. Nephthys tries to stabilize things but can't control this illusion as desired. It's unusual for an entity to be able to interfere with the imagination of an entity of her caliber and create this level of pressure, so she's 9 out of 10 sure, this is the intervention of the demon lord. There was only one answer, and when Mikhail realized it, he laughed instead of showing concern. "This is the first time we've seen a scene like this. Isn't it, demon lord?" Mikhail tries to forget the throbbing pain in his head and regain his spirits with a surge of excitement. At that moment, that ancient language rang out again, the imaginary world vibrated, and the demon lord was laughing crisply. Outside, Nephthys was still confused as to what to do. Demon lord, why, how could he invade this illusion? He couldn't interfere. Logically speaking, the barrier was still strong enough that he couldn't escape and interfere with the illusion. Set muttered with a pale face, "Demon lord, we are trying to do something to stop him from escaping, but he certainly can't sit still and let us do whatever we want." It was likely that the demons hiding somewhere had dug a small hole in the barrier for him, because these demons were so cunning. Set's eyes trembled when he said that. Her face darkened with thought. If the demon lord really decided to intervene, this would not be an easy problem to solve. It all could only depend on Mikhail. He had many unexpected plans, but would he be able to resist the demon lord even if it was just in an illusion? Meanwhile, Nephthys could still see the demon lord's energy squeezing Mikhail deeper and deeper, like he was laughing at her. Then, Nephthys spoke in a firm voice as if he had made a decision. "I had to stop this illusion." Set was stunned and stopped Nephthys. She couldn't stop it. Nephthys immediately said what she was going to do. "If I took myself as a hostage in his place, maybe it would be fine." In principle, Nephthys is the master of this illusion. If she disappears, the worst scenario can be prevented. Having decided to do so, Nephthys is forced to act quickly to disrupt his own energy supply. Nephthys gritted his teeth and prepared to self-destruct, so that Mikhail would have some way to escape and the holy relic he was in possession would not fall into the hands of the demon lord. Just before Nephthys can break her source of life, her attempt fails because of Set's sudden cry, "Nephthys, wait." She looked away, Set's eyes wide open in surprise as she looked at Mikhail and urged Nephthys to follow. Nephthys had just turned his head to look at Set and hurriedly turned his gaze back to Mikhail. The atmosphere around Mikhail, who seemed to have just been enveloped by the demonic aura, was changing. The black energy gradually dissipated, Mikhail's divine power and mana blended and began to push the demonic chi away. An impossible thing happened, because no matter how diluted the demon lord's energy was, its existence was far beyond Mikhail's ability to cope. The incredible sight stunned the two goddesses. Set muttered with hopeful eyes, "Wait a little longer." "I thought something was changing." Set and Nephthys didn't know what was going on in Mikhail's vision, but they both rekindled the belief that he could handle it on his own. Meanwhile, in the fantasy world, Mikhail is smiling mischievously instead of being afraid of the power created by the demon lord. Of course, he had never underestimated the existence of the demon lord. Before Regression, Mikhail's group of heroes couldn't even fight normally and were ridiculed by this demon lord. Of course, after that experience, he couldn't underestimate him even if he wanted to, and that was exactly why he thought of this possibility. Even though Mikhail didn't know the demon lord well and wasn't sure what would happen, but in any case, the possibilities were always open. he had always thought about the possibility of the intervention of the devil. A strong sense of threat weighed heavily on Mikhail's shoulders. The demon lord's fiery red eyes were still flashing violently, as if telling him to surrender immediately. But he didn't take any action. He didn't even try to do anything to escape from the demonic chi that was suppressing him, which was what Mikhail had been aiming for since he entered this illusion, or rather, everything was still going well from his point of view. As Mikhail slowly focused his mind, the power of the divine force that enveloped his soul began to support his body to rise, not that he was trying to use magic against the demon lord. He just wanted to see the demon lord clearly, despite the fact that he was mocking him. Perhaps he was feeling ridiculous when he saw an ordinary person who dared to resist his power. Mikhail didn't understand why this monstrous thing could put that heavy ass in here, but what he was going to do was what was decided from the beginning, so he didn't flinch from him. Pure and powerful, Mikhail focused all that force in his eyes, the sole purpose of which was to see the origin of the demon lord. He tried to raise his head to look at him just because of that. At this moment, his brain boiled for a moment. It sounded strange, but according to Mikhail there was no other word that could better describe this feeling. The moment he looked into the demon lord's eyes, if Mikhail was just an ordinary person, his brain might have been damaged and he would have become a fool. The demon lord possessed the power to make the brains of the person opposite him melt if he relaxed his mind even a little. Mikhail tried to hold on to his calm spirit. If he was caught up in the vortex of demons, he could literally be invaded by him. Then everything he had done so far would be meaningless. Thanks to his superior mental power, the pressure that had been focused on Mikhail for a very short time was stopped for a moment, probably because the demon lord was confused about not being able to subdue a mortal. Mikhail didn't miss this opportunity, of course. He didn't think he could tame the demon lord. Objectively speaking, up to this point, his strength was still incomparable to him, but he was determined to bet everything here. Mikhail didn't miss a gap as the demon lord was confused and exploded with divine power in the bottom of his eyes. He clearly felt that he was about to see through him, as if he was about to touch the depths of his essence. Although it was very brief, Mikhail definitely had the feeling of seeing something. He desperately grabbed it, a very small piece of memory from the pitch-black giant bearing the name of the demon lord. For a moment, Mikhail's vision becomes blurred, fragments of the demon lord's memories swirling around him like footage. Many vague memories intertwined with unclear voices. Stop, Asar, I hope you will understand, there is no end at all, us. Whether it was the demon lord's memory or not was unknown to Mikhail, but it wasn't the most important thing right now. He needed to focus on other scenes. Immediately afterwards, the demon lord began to rage. He roared, cutting off the connection between the two of them immediately. He was angry when a human brat dared to use his divine power to see through him. The ground that had been quiet for a while began to shake again, Mikhail trying to endure the fact that his legs were almost on the verge of collapse. This feeling of being threatened would cause fear and submission to anyone. But not with Mikhail. Instead, he smirked in front of the demon lord who was glaring at him. I just touched it and it is not polite for you to cut off the connection like that. The demon lord frantically swung his hand at Mikhail, but the change of mood that took place with him was even faster than the speed of his attack, a surge of excitement. Despite being interrupted by the demon lord, Mikhail was able to read the information about him in that short time: extinction, destruction and terror, a power that seemed to be the condensation of negative and destructive forces. In an excited mood, the amount of mana that had been suppressed until now suddenly exploded. Mikhail's mana soared along with the divine power began to form magic rings, 7 magic rings revolving around him. The 7th magic ring is not just an ordinary magic ring. It is a magic ring that was perfected at the time when Mikhail realized and better understood the existence of the demon lord. This magic ring was created to deal with the demon lord. A stream of white light burst out from Mikhail's fist. This was a fantasy world. Although the demon lord had intervened, its essence remained unchanged. This is not the world of demons. The demon lord is not capable of making imaginary things come true beyond its scope, which means that Mikhail can completely destroy this illusion. The magic formula was perfected in his head. The force and mana fused and began to unfold within his reach. He simply swung his shining hand up and slammed it to the ground. A stream of white light leaked from the ground, disrupting the vision, and the space around it was cracked out shortly afterwards. An escape created from the shattered parts of the illusion. Mikhail gently threw his body towards the exit with a giggling smile. Unfortunately, I had already accomplished my goal. So here I go. And with my words finished, Mikhail turned to emerge from the gloomy scene and into a bright white void. The demon lord's pupils were visible through the shattered fragments of space. He was trembling with anger and reached out to grab Mikhail again, but it was too late. he had been arrogant and given him too much time before. Although Mikhail has not yet understood the clues he sees in the Demon Lord's memories, he is still content to leave having achieved his purpose. Hearing the Demon Lord's angry roar behind him, Mikhail wanted to make him a little more angry, so, before completely getting rid of the illusion, he turned his head to look at him, raised his middle finger as he said goodbye, "See you later." Finally, Mikhail reads the Demon Lord's name to confirm that this encounter was his victory, and that provocation made him so angry that he couldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, outside, Set was worried about his fever, constantly calling out to Mikhail, "Mikhail, hey, Mikhail, wake up, Mikhail." As soon as Mikhail opened his eyes, he had to frown at the sudden pressure of Set's loud call, as if she was mourning for him. Set hugged Mikhail tightly with tears rolling down his cheeks that startled him for a moment. "Set, what's wrong?" Set shook Mikhail's shoulders so hard that his head nodded like a rag doll. "I was worried, though I knew he would be able to get out somehow." Mikhail was still puzzled. What was she saying? At this moment, Nephthys' gentle voice sounded from behind. Fortunately he had woken up. Mikhail clicked his tongue and replied, "I've only been there for a short time, what's the point of doing so much?" Nephthys explained. "You've been unconscious for 4 days?" Mikhail asked in surprise. Mikhail's eyes widened in disbelief, yet several days had passed as he fell into the illusion for a moment. Of course, there was no way it would be easy when the Demon Lord was involved. Just by hearing Nephthys' sigh of relief, Mikhail could understand it. "It took longer than expected, to the point that I was going to stop the illusion by going to the extreme. Fortunately, that's no longer necessary." Anyway, nothing serious happened in the end, but Set kept exploding with anger, unable to believe that the Demon Lord could interfere with the illusion. Unlike Set, Nephthys smiled coldly and excitedly. "So, what do you see in him? You must have achieved what you wanted." Mikhail looked at the hand with the feeling of authentic contact still there, the endless void, the hatred, and at the same time, I also understood why he was called the Demon Lord. And then, Mikhail looked at his hand engrossed for a while as if he still felt that what he had just experienced was a little unbelievable. It would be a lie to say that he completely anticipated the intervention of the Demon Lord, but he was prepared for any dangerous situation anyway. Mikhail quickly smiled happily when he felt that the energy of the 7th circle was still clear in his body. Well, there was one more thing that I got after this. To test, Mikhail immediately demonstrated the magic of the 7th circle to Set and Nephthys, a cluster of light created by gathering the force at his fingertips, blobs of light that float in the sky and flood the surroundings for a short time. Divine Magic Circle, also known as Level 7 Holy Magic. Before, Mikhail didn't have much trouble using magic with divine power, but now the level has changed, so the feeling of control is not very familiar. However, the good thing is that it is purer and more natural. Nephthys and Set witnessed that scene, and they both looked at Mikhail with eyes as if this was ridiculous. This thing, the 7th magic ring holy magic. Wait, he was only 22 years old now. Mikhail nodded casually. Yes. Set shook his head with an even more unbelievable expression. How could a person who had only lived 22 years of life be in the 7th circle? Mikhail clicked his tongue and replied, "Well, it's a little faster than I thought." Set exclaimed, "What do you mean just a little? Ordinary people will say that they have only reached the 7th circle in their entire life. You know that best, right?" Mikhail had prepared the answers to these kinds of questions and replied calmly, "Shouldn't a hero be able to do more than ordinary people? After all, this is a huge harvest to face that demon." Of course, the harvest does not only come from reaching the 7th circle. Finishing his words, Mikhail picked up a stone. Mikhail then placed the stone in the palm of his hand, slowly opening up the perception he gained during the analysis of the Demon Lord in the illusion. Mikhail pondered for a moment. "I'm sure it's destruction and destruction, it's complicated and ineffective, but if I use more than a certain amount of mana instead, then I will be able to slowly figure out a characteristic of the Demon Lord." Mikhail is increasingly immersed in the 7th magic ring. It seems that the characteristics of the Demon Lord can be reproduced by him to some extent, if not completely. With the power of the 7th magic ring holy magic, Mikhail quickly grasps the existence and structure of the stone he is holding. And he explains its structure in reverse order. While Mikhail analyzes the structure of the stone and thinks about the destruction and destruction characteristic of the Demon Lord, then suddenly a word came out of his mouth, "revealed." The stone that had been hard just a second ago had now disappeared without a trace, and even the shards were gone, as if it had never existed. After recreating that perception, Mikhail sighed and said to the two goddesses, "Earlier, I tried to recreate some of the perceptions that I had gained there. But it wasn't very effective. Mikhail's mind was a little sluggish, because there were countless other types of magic that were effective in vaporizing opponents without exerting such effort. After using the type of magic regenerated from the demon lord's perception, he felt suddenly weakened, and in the blink of an eye, the mana of the 7 circles was drained. If it takes 7 mana circles to turn a small stone like this into powder, then he can't use it in real combat with other opponents. Just when Mikhail thought that and turned his head to ask Nephthys and Set for their opinion, he saw their unusual expressions. Nephthys and Set were trembling and hugging each other and staring at Mikhail. He frowned suspiciously or looked at them. "What's wrong with the two of you? Why are you looking at me like that?" Set suddenly jumped up, stammered open, and pointed at Mikhail. You. Mikhail urged me," Set shouted as if he had just been in a serious crisis. "No, those are not the words he should have said now." Nephthys also shook his head and muttered and looked at Mikhail. He had actually just analyzed the demon lord, the power of destruction, which meant a lot. Of course, the effect was not high because it was only rudimentary improving, but since both goddesses were so shocked, Mikhail thought it was better to listen to them carefully. "What I just recreated is terrifying," Nephthys nodded with a very determined expression. "This is one of the essential powers that the demon lord often uses. It symbolized the end, destruction and extinction, the power of destruction that could evaporate the target from this world." At that time, Mikhail thought she might have understood some of what Nephthys was trying to say, so what she meant was what I had just done. Set immediately interrupted with a serious expression. Yes, what he showed us earlier was not just a matter of efficiency. More importantly, he had recreated the power of the demon lord with magic, of a human. Hearing those words, Mikhail blinked as if this was both meaningful and useless, considering the current situation. If he had to use up all his mana to dissipate a small stone with his thumb, then this power in his hands is of no value. Meanwhile, in Meryl, among the great demons who are hiding and growing their powers, Meryl is the only one who has much friction with Mikhail. Meryl's clenched hands trembled as she stared at that crystal orb. Damn hero. Meryl had always been observing everything that happened in the Holy Kingdom. And the Draculian territory, 2 plans that Meryl should have succeeded, but failed miserably. It was understandable that Meryl was mad, because it was a plan that she had painstakingly prepared step by step with a lot of time and sincerity, but she never expected it to be ruined so easily. After many failures, Meryl was pushed to the point of being ridiculed among her fellow men. Her hatred poured all that bad on the head of Mikhail, the hero, all because of that bastard. Meryl is a demon who specializes in deception and division. If she can't do those things, it would not be an exaggeration to say that she is no longer worth anything as a demon. Of course, just because she failed in the Holy Kingdom and Draculian didn't mean that she was waiting to die. She was still trying to find a way out for herself for more than a year. But sadly, all failed. Mikhail found out and by all means thwarted her plans. In the process, many other capable subordinate demons were purified. Neither Mikhail himself nor those around him could be affected, let alone exterminated. It's all because Mikhail is too strong compared to Meryl. This demon woman hasn't fully regained her power yet. She's different from the other great demons. Other demons can grow and become stronger as themselves, but the only way for her to become stronger is through deception and intrigue. Her power will increase as the humans manipulated by her become more and more corrupted, but since all previous plans have failed, her power is the weakest among the current great demons. The more worried Meryl becomes, the more irritable she becomes. There will be no plan to succeed until I kill that bastard. If there is a loophole. Suddenly a voice breaks through her thoughts. It's hard to meet you, Meryl. Meryl's face was distorted when he felt a familiar energy. When did you come here, Belphegor? The demon named Belphegor giggled in a relaxed voice and walked slowly. His eyes narrowed, and his light, ungroomed hair was neatly groomed among the curved horns that reached close to his ears. Meryl frowned uncomfortably and questioned Belphegor. Haven't we agreed that each demon king will not interfere in each other's affairs? Belphegor grinned. It was at first, however. Beelzebub was already dead. And another important plan of yours has also failed, alas. Belphegor ended his reminder with a gutter as if mocking Meryl. Belphegor's madness was obvious, and through his narrowed eyes, I understood what she meant, but it wasn't the demon lord's steely statement. Even if someone disappeared, it wouldn't be strange. Belphegor's voice was very straightforward and relaxed, but inside he was clearly uncomfortable and wanted to swallow Meryl to increase his strength. Hearing this, Meryl was startled to death, because she couldn't deny Belphegor's words, and there were few demons as cruel and ruthless as him. Meryl's 2 great defeats had affected the development of demons in the whole world, not just her. so her responsibility is undeniable. Seeing Belphegor's eyes flashing coldly, Meryl reflexively shrank his shoulders like a frog in front of a snake, intuition telling him that if she didn't say anything here, Belphegor would eat her, and useless people were not worth keeping in his eyes. A drop of cold sweat ran down Myral's back, her hands were also drenched in sweat. She tried to affirm in a trembling voice, "I already have a plan, no need to say more, I can do it." Seeing that Belphegor stopped laughing, Meryl dared to speak more calmly, "If the hero has ruined all my plans, I must also ruin his plans." As Belphegor became patient listening, Meryl began to explain his plan. Asar's tomb. The hero's goal was to perfect Asar's power. It seemed that he already had two things in his hands. Of course, he still has a long way to go to complete it, but we can't let him collect any more holy artifacts, Meryl said in a firm voice as if she knew she would succeed. In fact, the other great devils who had not yet appeared were also quite wary of this, so Belphegor quickly became interested in Meryl's idea. However, he also felt skeptical about her calculations. The problem was that none of us could determine the location of the tombs. "Do you know?" Meryl nodded firmly, "Yes, I know, I won't fail again this time." Seeing that Meryl only answered half-heartedly without specifying his plan, Belphegor thought for a moment and then clicked his tongue. What, you don't want to reveal it yet? Okay, I think it's okay to give you this last chance." But this was his last chance. Belphegor grinned again with sharp teeth full of lust. With a voice full of horror, he looked directly into Meryl's eyes and warned, "If he fails again, you know what will happen." Meryl nodded quietly, trying to contain the fear and humiliation in her heart. After regaining her fighting spirit, she gritted her teeth and assured Belphegor, "I promise not to fail. This time, I will give that hero a cruel death." In the heart of Meryl thinks, no matter how good Mikhail is, he can't know that she knows the location of the next tomb. A few days later, at Gut 10, a small kingdom known as the Sacred Land of the Rout, commonly known as the Root, and the resting place of the guides. Senior Guide, shouted to the person sitting on the throne, "Chief, what are you talking about?" Not only did he accept her, but he also allowed her to enter the Star Sanctuary. Cum's voice filled with anger, anxiety, and frustration. But Chief Gurton still replied indifferently in a calm voice, "This was necessary." Hearing those words, Cum frowned. Gurton was speaking in a calm tone, but it was more unusual than ever. Cum had no doubt that Gurton had been brainwashed. The best old man who always found the right answer faster than anyone else, the great chief who had brought Gut 10 to prominence, was fascinated by something. Cum didn't need to think deeply to guess the cause of this situation. It was a mysterious woman who suddenly came to see Cum a few months ago and asked him to lead the way to the chief. Cum really felt regret. She should have chased her away from the first time she approached them in a fierce goat's head mask and a mysterious smile, claiming to be the chosen guide, the woman who easily approached the chief as a matter of course. Even though she knew it was hopeless, Cum still tried to convince Gurton, no way, there had never been a case in history where outsiders were allowed to enter the Holy Land. She didn't even take an oath, she had no respect for our God. Gurton replied in a tone of indifference, "She said she wanted to, that's all." Cum protested desperately, "I couldn't understand." Gurton still looked at Cum with extremely blurry eyes. "Listen, Cum, I have been trying unceasingly, relentlessly to build a belt, a wise path to development. But, in the end, we still can't escape the level of this small country." Even when Gurton said these ambitious words, he remained calm as if he didn't really think it was his life's ambition. It wasn't until Gurton remembered a distant moment when he came into contact with Archbishop Killian in a humble way that his emotions began to change. "You say I'm excellent, but even I, the most elite in the kingdom, nor can they afford to cross the Holy Kingdom." Then, Gurton suddenly giggled, "But what about her? She showed us the future, as she said, if the god in the Holy Land appears, there will definitely be a lot of changes." Cum said to the cockroach, "Chief, this is not the future that our people dream of, this is wrong." Gurton immediately glared and shouted, "You are too much, Cum, how can the root god's servant be so afraid of change? Isn't it because we have a cowardly negative attitude that we will always be the guides?" Cum immediately retorted harshly, "But the root god never wanted to stand above anyone." Gurton reacted violently and slammed the armrest. "Shut up, my decision this time was for Gutton's future," and obeyed the will of the root god, and walked away. "If you continue to talk nonsense, you will lose your status as a senior guide." Gurton's statement left Cum stunned. Gurton had no intention of changing his mind, so Cum could only bow his head, leave his anger and sadness behind him, and walk out. He dragged out of the palace, unable to hide his anguish in every action, and sat down in disgust. Cum raised his head and looked at the sky, the blue sky was the same as ever, but it was the opposite of Gurdon's future. In contrast to that lofty sky, Gurdon's integrity and pride were collapsing, leaving Kum with no idea what to do now. Kum turned his head to look at the Holy Land in the distance, a large tomb that had existed for a long time. From an early age, Kum was taught about the importance and sacredness of the Holy Land. He is also constantly trained in the mission of leading visitors as a proper guide. But Kum had never been taught how to deal with a chaotic situation like now, so he could only hold his head and wonder, what the hell should I do? Then a bold thought suddenly flashed through Kum's mind, if only he had the help of the hero chosen by the Holy Kingdom, who possessed the power and righteousness that had been accumulated over a long period of time. But Kum quickly shook his head, the hero probably wouldn't cooperate with the worshipper of another god. Moreover, Gurdon was full of inferiority for the Holy Kingdom, so he definitely didn't want to shake hands with the hero either. When Kum was moaning like that, his gaze turned to the distance, suddenly opened wide. Kum saw a group of strangers walking in from afar. From the temperament of the person in the middle and the badge on his collar, Kum quickly recognized who it was and didn't dare to believe his eyes. No way, you, hero. Kum rubbed his eyes several times with unconcealable astonishment when he saw Mikhail. As far as Kum knew, there was only one person who could possess this level of power, so it was certain that it was the hero of the legend. Back a week earlier, Mikhail called everyone back and went straight to the point. Our next destination was Gut 10, Leon's eyes wide open with surprise. Leon was the first to speak up. Wait, to see if I'm going to overlook some important information. It's a small kingdom of ethnic minorities outside of our empire, and they're notorious for being extraordinary, aren't they? Mikhail nodded casually. Yes. Leon continued to speak in an even more subtle voice. I heard that they were worshipping a foreign god and were so devout that the Holy Kingdom once called them heretics. Mikhail continued to nod. That's also true, you know more than I think. It was the turn of the butler Mordin to ask softly, but his eyes were full of suspicion. If we go there, we probably won't be welcome, so what does the young master plan to do there? At this time, Set also spoke curiously. Right, what are you going to do there? Mikhail looked at everyone with a solemn expression, but his smile exuded a sly look. A hero chosen by Heikao, a hero who is both a savior and the greatest priest. In other words, I will go on a mission. A sense of sacredness and heaviness fell into the room as Mikhail decided it was time to return to heroism, but everyone looked at him in silence. And then, Leon, the butler Mordin, and Set put their hands together on their foreheads as if they were making a gesture to send a hero to his final resting place. Oh, my lord, Mikhail irritated his nose. Go away. It's okay, I'll be fine. Mikhail shrugged his shoulders with a calm expression, not a little worried. But the butler Mordin nodded again as if he had achieved a great enlightenment. Well, I see, you mean that this will be very bad. Leon at the side also showed a sad expression like a dog biting. The next life will always be a series of hardships and dangers, we have to endure it. The two of them say such things with a look on their faces and tell them to write a will immediately. There is nothing to object. Mikhail felt ridiculous and grumbled slightly. You think I'm like a plague when disaster strikes everywhere I go, don't you? At the same time, Leon, the butler Murim, and Set all responded with the same definite expression. Isn't it? Isn't that obvious? I think too. Mikhail looked at all three of them, silently cursing those ridiculous reactions, but in fact, what they said was not wrong at all. Since the return, Mikhail had been running for the future of the world, and this time his decision was definitely related to that as well. The third tomb and Meryl, according to Mikhail's thoughts, Meryl will definitely appear. This tomb is the only tomb of Asar that she knows. Mikhail found out because he did nothing during the time of managing Draculian's estate other than keeping an eye on Meryl. When Meryl showed signs of wanting to do something, he intervened immediately. In the process, he also earned a decent amount of information. Of course, Meryl must have been in a state of anger right now. She must have wanted to get rid of Mikhail right now. However, she didn't act in a hurry, knowing that doing so would not be easy, because Meryl herself had been severely damaged and lost many of the minions she had scattered across the continent. So Mikhail speculated that at first, Meryl would try to get a little closer to the tomb, but she probably wouldn't be able to touch it yet because of the sizable mistake that had made her more wary, and Mikhail had also predicted that Gurdon would be fascinated by Meryl. Leon interrupted Mikhail's line of thought with a question, but even if he was doing missionary work, why should he be Gut 10? Looking at the synagogue on the other side of the empire, the believers were overflowing without worrying about fighting with the heretics. Mikhail co-explained that is why we have to go further. Because they were worshipping an imaginary god that didn't even exist. Mikhail's statement astonished everyone. Especially Leon's expression became even more confusing. So were the people of Gyutan occultist, or were you judging too subjectively? Gods are not something that can be easily defined. Everyone knows even if someone believes in and obeys someone who is not a god recognized by the Holy Kingdom or Empire, that is still considered right if it has a pure and upright meaning. Mikhail went on to explain, the problem was that the imaginary god did not lead everyone in the right direction. The butler Mordin rubbed his chin for a moment and then asked, is that a doctrinal matter? It is said that the god that Gut 10 worships will rule over the correct answer. The god named Root will give answers to believers and give advice on the direction of life. But, it's strange if it's just an imaginary god. First of all, the monks of Gut 10 really get the power. Isn't that the divine power? Mikhail nodded. He is on the right track. It is the divine power. The butler Mordin was confused again. Then it must be a real god. Mikhail replied openly, if that god was really the way that they believed in, then it was just that. Of course, the question of the butler Mordin was correct. Even though Root was an imaginary god, the reason people still believed and worshipped him was because there was evidence of his existence. Root followers are those who are looking for answers. For example, suppose there are two paths A and B, with a deadly trap lying on either of those two paths. Those who follow the route given by the Root can be safe, which is why the Root followers serve as guides for many homes. Explore the continent as a guide. The butler Mordin seemed to have refocused his thoughts and asked Mikhail again, then, if he was going to Gut 10, to expose the true nature of the Root. Mikhail clicked his tongue and replied, Butler, I don't mean that. Think about it. If the god they worshipped for hundreds of years was actually a forgery of another god, would the followers of the Root accept it? The butler Mordin shook his head after a few seconds of contemplation. I don't think they would accept it. Mikhail smiled contentedly. So I told him that I was there to preach. That missionary was encouraged but not forced, so I had no intention of denying that the original church had taken root in Gut 10. If the will of those who serve the Root was right, there was no reason to criticize it as wrong, and when the butler Mordin heard this, another wonder lit up in his eyes. He cautiously asked Mikhail one more question. Well, so what if it was wrong? Mikhail smirked slightly. Don't ask such an obvious question. It was an easy answer for Mikhail. While the butler Mordin thought further, he remembered the past in his previous life for a while, what happened in Gut 10 before he returned, and what was the result of that. A cold smile appeared on Mikhail's lips. We must do the opposite of the original plan, leaving no trace behind. About a week later, Mikhail's group arrived in Gut 10, and the butler Mordin and Leon wondered if something had happened or if there was any demonic intervention along the way, but everything was peaceful. The city was in front of them. However, there were many complicated winding roads before reaching the city, and in front of them, a few guides were noisily walking around greeting guests. Only 5 gold, and 3 days of guidance for you. 3 days for 4 gold, except at night. 3 hours per week. We serve you for 3 days for 3 gold. The tourists were choosing a guide in the bustling scene, but Leon looked around with an expression as if he couldn't adapt. What kind of city is this? The person who answered Leon's question was Butler Mordin. This is normal in Gut 10 these days, Mr. Leon, let me explain it to you. According to the butler Mordin, Gut 10 is a rare labyrinth city on the continent, and has also become a popular tourist destination for connoisseurs. If you see it for the first time, it will be an overwhelming landscape that you can't help but admire, a city built on a large rock. The ground is naturally eroded over the years, forming a labyrinth. In some places, persistent vines are tightly intertwined and covered with flowers and grass. Leon raised his eyebrows suspiciously, a maze that attracted tourists. Butler Mordin looked around the city and the guides were engrossed in touting with affectionate eyes. Gut 10 was more than just a collection of intricate streets. Wherever visitors pass by, they will find many different interesting sights. Many people are fascinated by it and come here for entertainment. Of course, it has only suddenly become famous in recent years. He doesn't know it. It's not strange. He finished speaking. Butler Mordin looked at the suspension bridges and zigzag roads with an excited expression. Leon frowned with an expression of disapproval. Well, even so, they were living with invisible walls that separated them from the world. What Leon said also made sense, because Gut 10 was a labyrinthine city. The path was too complicated for beginners and the winding path couldn't be interpreted on a map, so it was literally a guide's land. The problem with visitors to Gut 10 is that they will get lost without a guide. Mikhail also admits that. It is true that it is usually necessary to hire a guide to visit Gut 10. The path to becoming a guide is not something that can be done by memorizing something. Because it is useless to memorize, the routes change in real time. there is no way that we can remember the path. In the case of the guide, it doesn't matter because they know the direction with the blessings they receive from the root god. Mikhail paused for a moment as if waiting for someone. There is no need for magic or swordsmanship to find your way in Gut 10, but with the blessing of the root, that's why hiring a guide is almost mandatory in Gut 10. Leon clicked his tongue and said, then I guess we have to hire a guide, but I heard that the wage unit is gold, a bit expensive. Mikhail suddenly shook his head in protest. What are you talking about? Why do we need to hire a guide? Leon looked at Mikhail with a puzzled look. Didn't he just say that he needed them? Mikhail smiled mischievously. I told you, ordinary people are like that. But I'm not that ordinary person. Even without a guide, there are still many ways to find a way. And when he finished speaking, Mikhail chuckled, and continued as he looked back at Leon. Leon immediately looked at Mikhail with eyes as if he was swearing, damn bastard, you've started again. But when asked by Mikhail about that discriminatory gaze, he quickly retracted his thoughts. After that, Leon walked quickly in front of Mikhail with a puzzled look. Then let's go in. If you know the way, there is no need to delay here. However, Mikhail suddenly pulled Leon's collar back with a pleasant laugh. No, that way too. Leon grumbled when he was grabbed by Mikhail's neck. What else? Mikhail replied casually, we have to wait for the instructor. Leon was both confused and annoyed when he heard this. This is not okay, this is not okay, so what should we do in the end? Mikhail didn't answer Leon's questions, but just sat down on the bench set up nearby, and the view from the outside when he sat on this chair was also quite beautiful. Seeing that the butler Mordin and Leon were still standing as innocent, Mikhail told them to wait a minute, someone would come soon, and soon after, the butler Mordin also sat on the bench with Mikhail. Leon looked at Mikhail and the butler Mordin with open mouths and sighed in frustration. Leon obviously thought that Mikhail's words were not very credible, but he quickly sat down on the bench. Perhaps through experience, he realized that no matter what he said, nothing would change Mikhail's decision. Not long after, a friendly greeting sounded in Mikhail's ear as he was taking a nap. When Mikhail looked up, there was a man with a strong body standing there. He tried to keep a gentle expression on his scarred face and asked Mikhail if he needed a guide. Beside Mikhail, Leon muttered something incomprehensible when he looked at Kum. Oh, there was someone really coming. Kum carefully introduced himself. My name is Kum, Gutten's senior guide, and it was a pleasure to meet you, the hero, while Set stared at Kum and another image appeared in her eyes. She whispered in Mikhail's ear, Mikhail, this old man. Mikhail nodded quietly. He could feel the traces of dense time on Kum's face even though Kum looked quite young. Actually, there was no reason why Mikhail didn't know Kum. This old man was not a mediocre figure as he introduced now. He was one of the reasons why Mikhail visited Gut 10 this time. Among the many guides in Gut 10, he was a special person. Mikhail smiled politely in response as if he didn't notice the signs of old age in Kum. Glad to meet him, Kum. While Kum had a face full of anxiety, Mikhail was extremely excited, because Kum was the only one here who could guide them to the third tomb of Asar. After that, Kum led Mikhail to a secluded place and said with a puzzled look, sorry for making everyone wait, I didn't expect to see such a heroic person. Mikhail shook his head with a gentle smile, it's okay, moreover, you realized earlier than I thought, I was deliberately hiding myself. Kum laughed bitterly, because I have a good sense, I have always relied on my intuition to judge people, so it is not difficult to recognize heroes. Mikhail just looked at Kum without complaining. He knew how valuable Kum's enhanced guiding intuition was, because it was the intuition that led to the tomb. Kum was the only one who could guide the way to Gutten's deepest tomb, which, of course, unfortunately he himself was unaware of. After thinking for a long time as if he was deliberating about whether or not he should speak, Kum finally opened his mouth cautiously. Can I ask Hero a question? Why did you come to Gut 10? Mikhail paused for a moment, pretending to ponder. Why, this is a sensitive question. But in fact, in his mind he had known how to answer for a long time. All of this was in his prediction. Then Mikhail spoke directly without reservation, because of Gurton's cruelty. Hearing this, Kum's eyes widened. Mikhail pretended not to know his reaction and said with a serious expression, I received a revelation, which was a warning that said that a great evil force was stirring to overpower the entire continent, and one of those evils has fallen on Gurton, which is why I visited Gut 10 this time. Has there been any problem with the chief lately? Of course there was no revelation here. Mikhail just made it up, but it didn't matter. As long as Kum believed the lie, he slowly revealed the information. A few months ago, there was a terrifying creature that approached. It was a woman. According to Kum's account, it was okay at first, even that the mysterious woman who visited Gurton was called a fairy. Because she comforted Gurton when he was in a state of despair. Cum frowned, it was already uncomfortable just thinking about it, his fists clenched and trembling. Everything was fine until then. If she only comforted him, I wouldn't be dissatisfied at all, of course, I wouldn't have a hostile attitude either. But the problem was that, when it came to this, Cum's throat seemed to choke, and he gritted his teeth to prevent the outpouring of anger. Cum's eyes were red as he continued to tell, the problem was that the fairy began to covet our holy land. Gurton was a smart man, and at the same time the one who had the strongest power when he received a blessing that was superior to that of any guide. All of Gurton's guides wholeheartedly followed such a chief. However, what happened when Gurton came to the Holy Kingdom became a blow that made him lose all motivation. He had locked himself up for years, the beginning of boredom from which there was no way out, until the woman who called herself the fairy Meryl came here, and when Gurton called Meryl's name, she replied with a kind smile, "Go ahead." There's the warmth in her voice, the endless love and care that makes Gurton blindly take it all indiscriminately, with cloudy eyes. That's why he's willing to open up to Meryl. "Sure, I've tried harder than anyone else." "Yes," Meryl said sweetly, "yes." Gurton slowly talks about his accomplishments. "I have brought many people to Gut 10 and made it grow. I have also facilitated the instructors to accomplish their tasks in various ways, which are achievements that are recognized by others and seem to be in Gurton's generation. Gut 10 has become much richer. There had been a time, more than anyone else, Gurton had worked hard for Gutton's future, but now that he was desperate, seemingly unwilling to do anything else, Meryl gently approached him. He had done nothing wrong, he had tried his best. How, then, can it be a sin to be broken by bad people? The mistake was made by the bishops of the Holy Kingdom, and arbitrarily selling the name of the gods and forcing him to submit to them was the most disrespectful act in the world. And with those whispers, Meryl drew closer and closer to Gurton. Then she pretended to smile bitterly and slowly put her arms around Gurton's head, as if she was patting a child. Meryl said indignantly about the Holy Kingdom again, if they weren't heretics, what else could it be? Hearing those words, the old chief closed his eyes tightly. He didn't know anything else, he just found this moment very comfortable. Gurton remembered what he had heard from Archbishop Killian of the Holy Kingdom Church a long time ago, that Gut 10 was not a cultist. In other words, the great god that Gurton was so proud of seemed to be nothing more than a heretic in the eyes of Archbishop Killian, which caused great disappointment to Gurton. Meryl continued to whisper divisive words. "Yes, the cult refers to those who demean others with such narrow thoughts, so the Holy Kingdom is the followers of the cult." Meryl whispered kindly, "I will help you fulfill your wish, the holy land of Gut 10, I will never forget your grace for giving me the opportunity to go there." When Gurton thought of the Holy Land, he vaguely remembered that it seemed as if the ancestors had ordered no outsiders to enter it, but he thought that it made no sense now, and that no matter how much he fought, nothing would change. Then there is no problem in betting Gurton's future on this lovely woman. Meryl hugged Gurton tightly. Everyone around him said that he needed to stay away from her immediately, but he thought it was wrong. He thought she wasn't a bad person. How could a woman hug him when he was crazy because of shame and low self-esteem be a bad person? Gurton slowly closed his eyes, deeply feeling the warmth brought by Meryl, and immersed himself in her temptations without the slightest doubt. Unfortunately, Gurton couldn't see Meryl's true expression because he was in her warm arms. The goat's head mask was thrown to the ground. Meryl showed her face. It was none other than the great demon Meryl. Her red eyes with a terrible smile appeared on her lips. It was really too easy. In Mikhail's previous life, when he and his group of warriors arrived in Gut 10, the land had collapsed. It was very simple. Fascinated by Meryl, the chief hurriedly sacrificed his tribe to the demon with his own hands. They lost all reason. At the same time, the group of heroes faces a land that has become a disaster. Gurton has completely become a puppet of Meryl while shedding bloody tears, screaming miserably, and behind him is Meryl's tearing laughter. Meryl laughed at the group of heroes with arrogant smiles. "Stupid humans, in the end you failed to stop me." At that time, Meryl became the commander of the 6th Legion, a demon king under the demon lord, called Puppet. Seeing Meryl standing on top of the collapsed tomb and declaring victory, Mikhail gritted his teeth bitterly. Damn, that damn bastard. All of Mikhail's comrades gritted their teeth in anger just like him, but there was nothing they could do, because just as Meryl had said, she regained her full power by sacrificing Gut 10. Mikhail turned to look at the old man who was witnessing the scene of Gut 10 being destroyed. After standing silent for a while, he fell to his knees with a distressed expression. In the last moments of his life, he had struggled during the collapse of Gut 10, but now, that was it. Kum had endured the wound that could not be healed. He breathed a sigh as he was dying, trying to tell Mikhail the words of the moon. I should have told the chief my skepticism in the first place. I am sorry, in the first place, I should have told you that I should have believed you. With blurred eyes, his voice gradually became slow, but he kept blaming himself. I should have led you there, even if the chief didn't let me in my eyes, I had to do something. Kum gasped with a sigh of difficulty as he tried to raise his head to look into the distance, Mikhail's eyes continuing to follow him. The last words uttered out of Kum's mouth before he was out of breath was a confusing sentence: the garden wanted guests. Saying that, Kum continued to look at the place he called the garden until the light of life was completely extinguished in both of his eyes, and there was no further explanation of the garden. At that time, Mikhail didn't even know what the garden that Kum was referring to was. He thought maybe he was just nostalgic for an old beautiful scene somewhere in this Gut-10 land, but the regret that Kum was expressing to the end of his life made Mikhail realize that the garden did not have such a simple meaning. He must have missed some very important opportunity with this garden. Returning to the present, after hearing Kum recount the whole incident in Gut-10, the atmosphere became heavier. Mikhail discussed his next plan with Leon and the butler Mordin. According to what Guide Kum said, it seemed that Meryl had successfully brainwashed the chief. Mikhail grumbled that Meryl was acting in a hurry than he thought. Leon and the butler Mordin agreed with that. Due to the events of the past year, the two of them also knew quite a bit about Meryl and her tricks hitting the human psyche. Leon grumbled at her hair while nagging. She didn't even know what boredom was. No matter how many times she destroyed her plan, she still came back. Mikhail clicked his tongue and declared firmly, maybe this would be the last time. In fact, Meryl has tried many plans, and all of them have failed. Within the Great Devil, the evaluation of her must have reached the bottom, so this will be the last chance. The laggard will eventually become the prey of his own kind. Leon heard Mikhail say that, and he was curious. So what was his plan? Mikhail replied vaguely, we're not going to do anything now. Leon and butler Murin immediately opened their eyes. Well, let's just sit back and see. You really want to leave it like that for a while, that demon's plan? Mikhail nodded with eyes full of intent. That's exactly why I'm just going to wait and see what she's going to do. It's as simple as that. Leon and the butler Murim are still dumbfounded, but Mikhail has no intention of explaining to them. Just like the previous times, he likes to look mysterious. Mikhail knew that Meryl must have anticipated what he was going to do and prepared. There was only one last thing she had to do here, destroy the tomb so that Mikhail could not get the holy relics there, and at the same time, she would destroy Gut-10 and use it to regain her power. Surely Mikhail would have to stop her, and of course, Meryl must also have something prepared to counterattack him, and if he acted according to her expectations then he would fall into the trap. Therefore, Mikhail had no intention of acting according to Meryl's plan. Only a fool would jump into such a blatant trap. From the beginning, he had the intention of immobilizing the army, so he would definitely not change one thing that was in his unfathomable plan. After thinking for a moment, Mikhail clicked his tongue again and said openly, Meryl's plan would definitely be delayed. Although she still didn't know it, the butler Mordin asked in a daze, what do you mean? Even the butler Mordin didn't understand what Mikhail meant. Leon could only look at him with the same blank eyes. Now that Mikhail thought about it, this was an opportunity that he should never pass up. He had to complete what he had missed before regression. The more he talked, the more confusing it was for others. It was certain that Gussen's holy land could not be deciphered in a short time. Even if it was possible, Meryl would have to be lost for a few days. Leon raised his eyebrows suspiciously as Mikhail pushed his back and butler Mordin. Well, then, in the meantime, what are you going to do? Mikhail replied with a generous smile. He asked the obvious again. We haven't been to this beautiful tourist destination before, so there is only one thing left to do in the remaining time. I have to go sightseeing a little. The butler Mordin and Leon looked at Mikhail silently and then at each other, an indescribable silence passing between the two of them. It was obvious that they were deeply skeptical of Mikhail's decision. He had never given them free time to play. After that, Mikhail came to find Kum to express his desire to travel. Hearing that, he stood there for a while with his mouth open. Sightseeing. Mikhail still calmly replied, isn't this a famous tourist destination? After all, the chief will not know that the hero has gone to Gut-10. Kum frowned and tried to refuse. I could have done it, but didn't you tell me that there was a catastrophe coming upon us? I'm sorry, but there wasn't much time left to roam. Mikhail nodded in agreement with Kum but cleverly used excuses to convince him. I knew that, but I didn't know Gut-10. In particular, this labyrinth city had great potential in terms of directions. Come to think of it, without a detailed understanding of Gut-10, we wouldn't be able to effectively resist the evil that lurked ahead. right? Hearing that, Kum just started to relax his tense mood. Mikhail smiled confidently. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he was going to research instead of sightseeing, you know what I mean. Only then did Kum nod his head as if he understood. If you wanted to do so, I would show you the way. Did you just want to visit the places in Gut 10 by chance, or was there any place you wanted to go? Mikhail turned his eyes towards Gutton's view. It was really distorted and winding in all sorts of ways, like a living creature that was constantly moving. The path was changing, and the scenery was also changing in real time. As a tourist destination, Gut 10 has all kinds of beautiful scenery, some of which are particularly outstanding, but ironically, most tourists don't get to witness that beautiful view because it is off-limits to tourists. The reason was simple, because among the countless guides, the number of people who could access that majestic view was also very limited. To be more precise, only a guide recognized by the tomb was able to lead the way there. While remembering what Kum regretted the most in his previous life, Mikhail asked him with a mischievous smile, "Can you take me to the place with the best view in Gut 10? He was sure everything he wanted was there. Kum then leads the way for Mikhail without any doubt about his purpose. The place they are heading to is not an ordinary sightseeing spot, it is the place that Kum is most proud and cherished in Gut 10. Kum was a little hesitant at first, because there was a time when the Holy Kingdom church government persecuted the Gut 10s, considering them heretics. That was the time when the heresy called Archbishop Kilian invaded the church, but Kum believed that the hero in front of him now was at least not of the same kind as the archbishop of that day. His eyes are a blessing from Root, who gave him the qualification to judge everything in the world, which is why he believed in his judgment and his eyes when looking at Mikhail. The place where Kum took Mikhail was a beautiful place called Root's Garden, and when he followed Kum, Mikhail remembered Kum's last words in his previous life, what the garden he was talking about, and why he expressed regret to the end of his life. Of course, the garden is not only a beautiful view, it is located in the deepest part of Gut 10 and is not even well known by the guides. In fact, this is the heart of Gut 10. Suddenly, a hurricane emerges that brings with it dense dust and fog that obscures Mikhail's vision. He hurriedly raised his hand to cover his face reflexively, but his eyes remained open so as not to lose track of Kum's footsteps. Suddenly, Kum spared his words, but his way of speaking was a little different from before. "Do you know where we're going?" Kum doesn't stop and doesn't even turn his head to talk to Mikhail in the polite way a guide should do. More importantly, Kum still asked Mikhail this even though it was a little-known fact, and he immediately realized what he meant by the question was not as simple as normal gossip. Mikhail replied in a voice as if speculating, this was the most thorough hiding place, having to pass through intricate ditches, and there was a strange thing that only a few people seemed to know about this place because there were no other tourists on the way. Considering such a situation, there was only one thing that came to my mind immediately. Gutton's sanctuary. Kum's eyes widened, but it didn't seem like he was particularly surprised, but that he had just accepted Mikhail's plausible answer. Kum still didn't look back at Mikhail and continued to ask, "You know that?" Mikhail used the excuse of constant coercion in his head, "Because I was a hero." Kum smiled wryly. "Hero, you know, I used to doubt Root," Mikhail said with a worried expression. "Oh, this is not something that can be taken lightly." Kum laughed sarcastically. "You understand that, but the reason is also quite funny. It is because the hero, a savior chosen only by the Holy Kingdom. I cannot accept that fact." Kum doubting his faith is certainly not simple, so Mikhail cautiously asks him, "This story has anything to do with the holy place we are going to?" Kum still looked forward to the thick fog and replied, as he knew, the sacred place known to the public was not actually here, but this place was also considered a part of the holy place. Seriously, the place that the other woman wanted to approach. Mikhail thought and chose his words before opening his mouth. It was just a shell. In other words, even if the devil could get in here, there was a limit to what he could achieve. Kum didn't hesitate to admit, that's right. In the simplest terms, the holy land that Meryl was desperate to win now was like the tomb of the storm that Mikhail encountered before his return. It was a fake, and the path he was taking was now a secret one. Kum interrupted Mikhail's line of thought, continuing what I said earlier. I don't consider the hero to be the representative of the Holy Kingdom Church. If so, the hero will only be the representative of Heikao, the god of the Holy Kingdom. Speaking of this, Kum suddenly stopped and turned around. Then he looked at Mikhail with probing eyes. Shouldn't the will and mission of the hero be in such a higher position? Mikhail wasn't really surprised. For some reason, he had a feeling that it seemed like Kum would ask such a question. At the same time, Set whispered in Mikhail's ear, it was a pretty sharp question. The old man seemed to have put a lot of meaning into the question just now. How did he plan to answer? Come quietly waited for the answer and Mikhail thought quietly. Of course he had to answer exactly what he wanted. This was a question that was asked right in front of the Holy Land. There were many things that could depend on that question later, and he had to carefully consider his heroic identity. Mikhail wondered what kind of hero he was going to become, or rather what kind of hero he aspired to be, but in retrospect, he never delved into that. Actually, the reason Mikhail wants to be a hero in this regression is simple. It is to overthrow Siegfried. When Mikhail tries to prevent him from becoming a hero, he has no choice but to become a hero. Of course, as a hero, Mikhail still intends to lead humanity to victory in the war against the demons, just like any other hero, but what the hero's nature has a mission is only now in his mind. From the beginning, heroes have been creatures created by the gods. Heikao is the one who chooses the hero, and the hero has always done her will, at least until now. But Mikhail didn't want that. His anxiety didn't last long, just a little time for him to organize his thoughts, because the goal he had been aiming for from the beginning until now was no different. Mikhail smiled happily and declared to come, I am the representative of all humanity. Not only was it limited to Heikao alone, I could be a hero of the Holy Kingdom Church and still be able to help Gut-ten. In addition, I could become a hero of another empire or kingdom if needed. When Kum heard these words, it seemed that the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. After all, Mikhail only had one wish before his return, which was to protect and sustain life for humanity, to ensure that that damn demon would never invade this world again. He was willing to do everything, even if it had to fight the gods. Set clicked his tongue and said to Mikhail, don't worry, you and Heikao's wishes are not much different. Mikhail knows that, but in his opinion, affirming your direction is very important and you have to show your determination from the beginning, just like when he helps others, all aimed at a single purpose of assisting him in his later fight against the demon lord. With his experience and practical actions, Mikhail can affirm with certainty to come, I protect all of humanity. In other words, the relationship with the Holy Kingdom Church is only to receive help to protect humanity. The more Mikhail spoke, the more bold he became, even eloquently declaring, if the god Heikao harmed humans, I could also oppose her. Just like I was trying to deal with the demon lord. After Kum heard these words, his facial muscles relaxed with a silent smile. Mikhail looked at Kum with sharp eyes. How, was such an answer enough to satisfy him? Kum nodded with satisfaction. Well, I'm just an old guide, no need to address him so solemnly, but it's not bad, and then he kept laughing forever. Mikhail then asked a question full of implications. If Root was satisfied, wouldn't that be a good thing for me? At that moment, everything that was moving around Mikhail stopped, and the image of Kum in front of him began to fade, replaced by white wings that spread out in the bright light. A boy with white wings stood in front of Mikhail and smiled gently, which was more than enough to satisfy me. Meanwhile, in a place far away from the Holy Land, Leon was crossing his arms in a daze as everyone watched the scenery. Everyone was happy, both eyes were fully focused on the beautiful scenery, no one felt threatened or worried about anything. To them, Gut-ten was merely a beautiful tourist destination, but Leon and the butler Mordin looked at everyone with heavy faces. Leon muttered with a bored face, this is a situation where we don't know when Gut-ten will be attacked, but it feels strange that this place has such an atmosphere. Butler Mordin also sighed, we can't do anything else, even Gut-ten's senior guide doesn't know how serious this is, so how can the low-level people and tourists know? After speaking, Butler Murin looked around with sharp eyes. Of course, the current situation is indeed very dangerous, we can't be as vigilant as they are. Leon also agreed with him and took a deep breath to regain his spirits. After that, he put his hand on the sword at his waist. It was a reflex action. For everyone, this was a more beautiful tourist spot than any other place, but for him, this was a battlefield. Even if there was vigilance, he didn't know when the demons would launch an attack. Leon thought that perhaps the great devil was watching from somewhere and preparing to sneak in. He recalled, if it weren't for Mikhail, all of Meryl's plans would have been successful, the Holy Kingdom would have collapsed at the end of the decade, and an irreversible catastrophe known as the Immortal Monster would have exploded in Draculion. At the end of that endless battle, humanity can destroy itself. Leon understands that Meryl has been defeated by Mikhail many times, but not because the demon is incompetent. It was because Mikhail, strangely enough, was aware of the problem before it happened, and it seemed that there was something in him that could not be explained simply in the name of a hero, even though Leon could not guess why Mikhail's intuition was so sharp. But he was sure that this was not a situation where he could act carelessly. Leon remembered what Mikhail had said before leaving, I have something I want to ask you to do, Leon. There's no way Meryl can't play a trick on Gut-ten, the work of a great demon. Of course it's not simple. While I'm away, you and the butler should find out about this." Mikhail just said that and went with come without explaining anything more. Leon thought carefully about Mikhail's instructions and looked around carefully. There must be something that the devil was planting somewhere in this beautiful scene. Leon narrowed his eyes at the crowd and kept reminding himself, there must be something sinister lurking around here. What it is, what could it be? Leon recalled the moment he dealt with the demon-possessed priests in the church, and a speculation flashed through his mind as to whether Meryl would disguise himself as a human and hide among these visitors and guides. But he immediately shook his head, denying his speculation. After thinking a little more, he was definitely not like that. Unlike the time in the Holy Kingdom, where she had to bow and hide, Meryl's influence in Gut 10 was very solid, as evidenced by her ability to manipulate Gutten's chief. For now, Meryl wouldn't be afraid to use more radical measures because she was occupying a very high position in the community. As long as the hero didn't appear, no one in this community would be able to stop her from doing what she wanted. Thinking of this, Leon involuntarily laughed. Somehow I found myself thinking the same as that damn name. Well, this wasn't a bad change either. Later, Leon turned to ask the butler Mordin, who was more experienced and knowledgeable than him in many ways, what a demon could do to control Gut 10 almost completely, which was exactly what Meryl would do here. Hearing those clues, the butler Mordin pursed his lips and began to think carefully, what a demon could do. Then, his sharp gaze turned to the crowd in front of him, where Gutten's bustling life was still going on quietly as usual. Tourists are smiling happily and the tour guide is taking them to where they want to go. What a peaceful sight. It doesn't seem strange at all. However, the butler Mordin's expression suddenly darkened, and the expression lasted for a short time as if he had detected anomalies in the crowd. Butler Mordin quickly regained his original calm expression and smiled. "Mr. Leon, this is really a big deal." Leon frowned suspiciously or looked at him. Why did he suddenly say that? Butler Mordin continued with an wry smile. The tourists and guides he saw over there, everyone, without exception, were mind-manipulated. Leon immediately turned his head to look closely at the crowd with bewildered eyes. The people who were standing in front of Leon all had demon marks somewhere on them, although the marks were faint, but if you looked closely, they could still be seen. On the outside of these people, there was no concrete sign of a controlled mind, but there was a demonic energy that was strongly connected to them through that faint imprint. Meanwhile, the illusion that mimicked Kum's appearance gradually dissipated. Mikhail was facing a boy who seemed to be younger than him, his voice resounding with a giggling laugh. What an interesting dude. This boy with the appearance of a 15-year-old is Root. He looks a little tired, dark circles under his eyes, skinny wrists are exposed under the baggy sleeves. Root looks at Mikhail with interest. "When did you find out?" Mikhail replied bluntly, "I realized right away. Didn't you switch places with Kum when it was foggy for a while?" The process of changing the space was accompanied by dizziness and short-term disturbances in the senses. At the worst moment, Root replaced Kum. Then Mikhail asked Root, "Well, where's Mr. Kum?" Root shrugged his shoulders with a mischievous smile, and went back to the entrance. "I mean, before coming here, that's all that kid was allowed to do. That kid wasn't qualified to take some tomb challenge." "Well, everyone in Gut 10 was like that." Root said that with a bitter smile and glanced over Mikhail's shoulder. "So how long are you going to be silent, Set?" At this point, Set was hiding behind Mikhail, refusing to show his face, let alone return to his normal form to talk to Root. As soon as she showed her face, Root giggled and greeted, "It's been a long time, Set." "How long has it been?" Set appeared with a dissatisfied look on her face and grumbled at Root, "Damn Root, I've never had time to count things like that." After that, Root looked at Mikhail again with dark eyes. "Anyway, welcome challenger, you have successfully discovered the secret of the tomb that I am administering. How did you find this secret?" Mikhail lied again without blinking. "I found a few useful notes." Root seemed to have guessed the source of those notes, the star notes, Thoth. Mikhail smiled and confirmed, although it was just a lie, the guards of the tomb couldn't get out anyway, so Root wouldn't be able to tell it was a lie. Root suddenly burst out laughing as if he was amused when his colleague made a mistake. "Thoth, you must have made an unusual mistake. That kind of doesn't resemble the personality of a stiff guy like you at all." After calming down, Root said to Mikhail seriously, "Well, even if you look at the records, it doesn't mean that you can conquer this tomb, but I have no doubt about your abilities since you have already received 2 holy relics." After a moment of silence, Root frowned at Mikhail with sharp eyes inappropriate for his age. He was observing the marks on Mikhail's hand. The Root can read the abilities that Mikhail possesses, not only those holy objects, the World Tree, Hey Cow, the other powers that you have as well, they don't even work separately from each other. Root stared at Mikhail at close range, with a strange look as if judging. This was the only hope against the demon lord. As expected, being recognized by two apostles of Asar was a big deal. Moreover, it seems like Heikao and Yggdrasil also recognize you, Mikhail replied confidently. I think I'm qualified. Root's squinting made Mikhail goosebumps. Definitely qualified, but qualification and qualification were actually two separate things. Mikhail was also not surprised to be suspected and judged by Root. He also gave up the intention of convincing Root to give him the holy artifact verbally. Root is essentially a fundamentalist. Mikhail has heard that even if the holy artifact is in danger of being destroyed, his principles will never be broken. There is nothing more pointless than making an emotional appeal to a rigid fundamentalist. Thinking so, Mikhail quickly got straight to the main point. Okay, then, has the content of the challenge been decided? Root Thief replied. Initially, it has already been decided. Hearing this, Mikhail immediately understood that it meant that the challenge had changed. Root began to explain. Initially, it was a challenge to decipher the labyrinth and get to the right place where the holy relic was, but the problem was that damn demon had already destroyed the testing system with its manipulation, so the testing method had changed a little reluctantly, and after finishing his words, Root immediately stretched out his hand, and a faint light flashed in his hand. That light gradually appeared in the shape of a cube like a Rubik's cube, but there was an additional side that was protruding on one side of the cube, and on each small cell there were ancient characters that emitted a light blue light. Intuitively, Mikhail asked Root, is it the holy artifact? Root smiled sly and confirmed, yes, this is my holy artifact, the labyrinth. The Root rotates the cube floating in the air. The principle is to test, so it must be tested. But that demon had intervened, so let's change the content to something better, and Root's eyes flashed with frustration, although his appearance was still calm as if he didn't agree with the demons. Root then pushes the drifting cube towards Mikhail. When Mikhail picked up the cube, Root continued to explain, this was the possession of the power of this maze, which was also a maze in itself. And Meryl, that demon is trying to decipher my labyrinth and is trying to break it by force. I mean, I don't like that at all, and here we are, we've got a wonderful solution, and here we go, and then Root looks at Mikhail with hidden eyes. By this point, Mikhail had a rough idea of what Root was going to say, and he let out a slight sneeze knowing that it would take a little more time than expected. Afterwards, Mikhail took the initiative to say what he thought Root meant. If someone dared to risk their lives to cross the labyrinth of his own accord, then of course someone else would need to stop him. Root laughed amused by Mikhail's keen intelligence. Precisely, Mikhail continued to say with a serious look, this could be a great test against the great devil's decryption. Root nodded repeatedly as if he liked what Mikhail said. Oh, we have the same thoughts. Then, Root pointed to the cube and made a request, I'll lend you my authority over this labyrinth for a while, if you can stop that demon. This relic will belong to you. Root continued to giggle after offering the challenge and the reward he deserved, thinking in his heart that he was not ashamed to be a particularly difficult and unpredictable apostle. It took Set a while to understand Root's wishes, so, in short, the subject of this challenge was a confrontation between a spear and a shield, right? Root replied in an excited voice, yes. Root glanced at Mikhail again. So, challenger, are you confident that you will become an impregnable shield? Mikhail pondered for a moment. Impenetrable. In Mikhail's eyes, this was an offer with no reason to refuse. If confronting Meryl was a challenge, then he was willing to welcome it with open arms, and it was not enough to just become an impenetrable shield. He smiled confidently and declared to Root, that's not enough, I'm going to break that spear myself. At the same time, Meryl was with the chief. Gurdon stared into the smoky void with his hazy eyes and called out her name, his consciousness almost swallowed up by Meryl. Meryl gently stroked Gurdon's face. Yes, Chief, you just say. Hearing that, Gurdon nodded in a daze. He tried to think, wondering if something strange was happening, but that thought quickly disappeared. His mind seemed to be covered in fog. Gurdon asked in a blur, am I doing it right? As you said, if the seal on the Holy Land is lifted and Root stands up, Gurdon's status will increase. Meryl said with a deceitful smile, but Gurdon didn't see it. Listen, Chief. You've heard the senior guides talk and most of them welcomed his intentions, actively spreading the faith about the Root. Meryl covered Gurdon's mouth when he tried to say something related to the fact that Cum was still vehemently opposed to this. Then she whispered in Gurdon's ear again, it's all right, he's done nothing wrong, on the contrary, as a leader, you should prove your authority by beheading the old man who dared to oppose you. Then Meryl gently placed his hand on Gurdon's face, obscuring his already blurred vision. Think about it, the humiliation he had endured from the bastard old man of the Holy Kingdom. Gurdon slowly recalled how he had been humiliated by Archbishop Killian and how Root had been despised as a heretic. Gurdon remembered his humiliating clench and gritted his teeth so much that they became shaky. Yes, I will never forget. The hatred in Gurdon's mind was burning again. Yes, shouldn't we look at the faith of the Holy Kingdom Church trampled under our feet? Who is the real God? Let them see which answer is right. Hearing this, Meryl grinned. As expected, it was easy, because humans are so stupid. Meryl was overjoyed that victory had come close to her. She was blocking the entrance to the tomb without knowing that there was another passage leading to the tomb guard, the one that had led Mikhail into. But Meryl's joy didn't last long, and a voice suddenly sounded in panic, "Demon King. The labyrinth of the tomb that you were deciphering." Meryl's subordinate hesitated and delayed the report for a while, seemingly afraid that this news would drive her mad. Meryl didn't like the embarrassment of the subordinate, so he asked in a grumpy voice, "What's the matter?" The subordinate hesitated to answer. "The situation is not what we expected, the problem is." After a while, Meryl's face was terribly distorted by the subordinate's report. "What are you talking about? The maze I'm deciphering is disturbed." The subordinate is stuttering. "I don't know, but what should I say? It's still going on." It seemed that someone was manipulating the labyrinth from within, anticipating our decryption. Meryl became even more irritated when he heard that. Root is a principled person, he will not interfere in the labyrinth. As long as he didn't borrow someone else's hand. At that moment, a thought flashed through Meryl's mind that made her no longer in the mood to shout at her subordinate. Meryl belatedly remembered an existence that had always stood in her way. Whether that hero ever acted on his own thoughts? No, not once. Wasn't that why I always withered and died when he defeated and deprived me of everything? Meryl swallowed desperately and quickly came to the worst conclusion she could imagine, which was that guy, that bastard who was the first to touch the labyrinth, better than me, who came months earlier and was well prepared. When he came to that conclusion, Meryl's face was horribly disfigured. Meanwhile, Mikhail is engrossed in working with the cube, all sorts of letters floating in the air around him and wrapping around him. When a character disappears, a new character will appear. The position of the interpreted character will be quickly replaced by a new character. Things will become more complicated over time. Looking at Mikhail, who was working hard, Root sat on the side shaking his thighs with a satisfied smile. "Really interesting," Set indifferently asked Root. "What's interesting?" Although Set was still annoyed with her, Root didn't pay attention and just shook her legs while praising Mikhail. "That guy," she said, "he's only 22, I mean young, he's quite young, even younger than the very short lifespan of a human." Root's eyes narrowed to look at Mikhail judgmentally. "That guy in the 7th circle, I don't underestimate people, because they have potential that we don't know, but this is really different. It's not a matter of metrics at all. If it's just the 7th circle, I'll just think it's the ability to grow like a monster, but what makes the difference in this case is that he even succeeds in deciphering a holy artifact so instantly." The more Root thinks about it, the more confused and curious he feels about Mikhail. Simply put, the holy relics are a category of power that reaches a magical level beyond human magic. But what Mikhail was doing was to use magic to unravel the structure of the holy artifact. How a holy artifact could be easily interpreted through human hands, Root could only think of a case that could explain this. Mikhail's level had already surpassed that of humans. Moreover, Mikhail seemed to be very relaxed. Unlike Meryl, who was trying to interpret the labyrinth from the point of view of magic, he was interpreting it from a higher position, transcendent magic. The starting points of the two sides were inherently different, so there was nothing that Mikhail had to rush. As if reading Root's thoughts, Set spoke up. "Heroes are not ordinary people." Root laughed at her naive explanation. "Haha, I've also met quite a few heroes. If this is the normal rank of a hero, what else can I say?" He couldn't even be called a human anymore. It didn't matter if the hero was aware of it or not. At that moment, Root's gaze suddenly turned toward Set. It was a rather cold gaze. If he was at the level of a normal human, then it was absurd for her to be here. Hearing this, Set was startled and intertwined her hands together, but Root still didn't stop the bitter scolding. It was punishment for her. Set lowered her head with her eyes as if she could shed tears at any time. The real Set had such a past. It couldn't even be considered just the past because all that was still affecting her now. She should have told Root that she should have disappeared from this world, but for some reason, she didn't do that. Root continued to let go of the bitter words. "If possible, I want to atone for my sins with my own hands." "You don't have that ridiculous thought." Set choked up in response. A little different. Instead of answering, Root just looked at Set in silence. After a while, instead of angrily retorting, Root nodded and accepted Set's words. well, I guess. It was said that what happened that day was a punishment, but she was already caught up in it anyway, and Set felt guilty and tried to explain, no, me. However, Root interrupted her as she tried to say something more. Stop here, if you continue to argue, there won't be any good results anyway. Set bowed her head timidly, okay. Root looked up at the sky with cold eyes. It had been a long time, I was quite short-tempered at that time, but over time, it has softened a little. It wasn't that she didn't understand the consequences of what she had done. When Root spoke of this, the atmosphere between them completely slackened and fell into heavy silence. After that, Root's eyes stopped at Mikhail with a vague line of thought, perhaps. At that time, it could even have been his arrangement, we will never know. Set laughed bitterly at Root's words. She remembered the past for a moment. Needless to say, at least until now, they were all just looking at Mikhail. Mikhail didn't know about the conversation between the two gods, he just focused on the letters floating in the air. It was fun, he was glad to be able to see things that were previously impossible to see even after reaching the 9th circle and reaching the peak of human magic. Of course, at the moment Mikhail has not been able to keep up with Meryl, who came first and penetrated the labyrinth. When he checked, a significant area of the labyrinth was deciphered. This labyrinth was very complicated, the structure changed in a matter of seconds, and many things became different from before. Therefore, decoding the labyrinth here is not about finding a way. Rather, it creates a path to the destination according to a structure that changes every few seconds. It must fix the changing space and make that space no longer change. By the time Mikhail saw the labyrinth, Meryl had already succeeded halfway, but her efforts would be in vain. From the moment Mikhail came here and met Root, everything she did was destined to be in vain. He saw everything. This map of the labyrinth, the way Meryl cleared the way and deciphered it, all Mikhail could see clearly. The path she was trying to cross was shining brightly before his eyes. The path she had created could be smashed at any moment. Mikhail began to gnaw on Meryl's path on the character map in front of him. Little by little, among the characters, there were black glittering letters with demonic air. The characters had been deciphered. Interestingly, everything Mikhail sees and does now is not within the realm of calculation, it is instinctive. His body reacts on its own and brings things related to the other demon into sight. Everything appears too clearly. Mikhail decided not to break it all at once. If he exposed too much distance in the race, the other side would easily give up, which was not what he wanted. He wanted Meryl to still need to pay more attention to this side and become angry, impatient, worried. She must be in a very bitter state right now. Just thinking about it was enough to make Mikhail excited. Images of his past life flashed back to Mikhail's mind, even though he knew that it was a thing of the past and a thing of the future that would never come, but he still clung to it, and he wouldn't let Meryl die easily. Of course, she would soon realize that he was playing a joke with her. But by then, it would also be over. Mikhail continued to rhyme his fingers around the path of demonic chi that Meryl had created, just like the way she played with others. He would play with her in the palm of his hand. It was for the same reason that Mikhail left clues for the butlers Mordin and Leon before he arrived at Root's garden, so that they could figure out Meryl's plans and distract her attention. Mikhail smiled at the thought of the two of them, who were having a headache thinking and trying to solve the situation on their own, but he also believed they were capable of meeting his expectations. Meanwhile, Leon was also thinking of Mikhail. He gritted his teeth and grumbled at the butler Mordin. Butler, I've only felt it lately. That Mikhail was definitely a psychopath. Leon's eyes immediately flashed with resentment towards Mikhail. He had seen him crazy before, but only now did he dare to speak ill publicly. The more Leon thought about it, the more angry he was that he scratched his head and screamed, "It's ridiculous that he doesn't know about this situation. I'm sure he threw it away to us so that we can deal with it ourselves. He's a very antisocial bastard." Butler Mordin shook his head. "Uncle Lien, what are you talking about? How can you call the young master a psychopath?" Hearing this, Leon secretly wondered if he had used too harsh words. He frowned at the butler Murin while thinking about it. No matter how bad it was not advisable to curse the young master they were serving. However, the subsequent harsh reaction of the butler Mordin left Leon completely speechless. He quickly apologized to the mentally ill people. "Don't insult them like that." Leon was innocent for a moment before shedding tears because of the butler Mordin's loyalty to Mikhail. After relaxing for a while, the two of them returned to the problem they were facing. Leon looked at the crowd with worried eyes. After all, this was not a trivial matter. Butler Mordin also returned to a serious look of agreement with Leon. Yes, at this level of demonic darkness, if things went wrong, she could have many ways to use the hostage. There are many tourists and guides who are in Gut 10 to visit. Meryl can use them as a shield to oppress Mikhail and his comrades, or order all those affected by the demonic energy in Gut 10 to commit suicide. Of course, that didn't guarantee her victory, but she would do everything she could to make Mikhail suffer. For the demon, a human life is even inferior to a roadside stone. There will be no hesitation when she uses them in the fight with the hero. Leon nodded in agreement with Butler Mordin and was also a little relieved when he saw that everyone was still laughing and saying, "It seems that the great devil doesn't know that the two of us are here yet, so she hasn't made any moves yet. It's lucky." Butler Murim smiled at the thought of Mikhail. It must have been because he, perhaps deliberately, the young master must have deliberately shown something to distract her, otherwise, it would be difficult to explain the current peaceful situation. After speaking, Butler Murim quickly shook his head and regained his fighting spirit. This is the opportunity that the young master has given him. It must be useful in some way, although we haven't found anything more yet, but at least it is not as hopeless as the first impression. Leon wasn't used to using his brain, so he felt uncomfortable and grumbled, Can't we just cut off all the demons' heads?" Suddenly a voice sounded from behind Leon's shoulder that startled him, "We can decapitate them." Leon glanced at the direction where the sound was coming from and saw a small spirit sitting there. It was Mole, the spirit friend Mikhail had summoned on his journey to the capital more than a year ago. Lovely Mole sat on Leon's shoulder and looked at him with round eyes and a bright smile.